Chapter 305. After understanding all of this, the nearly 50 students immediately shouted in a loud voice, "We will obey the Mountainhead's orders." "Okay, we'll leave in 15 minutes. You can all go and prepare." After waving his hand to dismiss the team, Yang Qindong called Junko, Tai Qingyi, and Jiang Ping. They were the only 3 women among the students. After calling them in front of him, Yang Qindong said in a very casual tone, "You don't have to follow the team, but stay in the Yang family manner." Tai Qingyi had talked to Yang Qindong more than once and knew that her task was to protect the safety of the madams, so she naturally had no doubts about staying and immediately agreed. Junko, on the other hand, raised her head and asked with a puzzled expression, "Why?" In the past few months, the students in the Yang Family Academy made Junko's Chinese more fluent. Because she often underwent some physical training, her skin was not as white as before. But at the same time, it also looked a lot sturdier and even had a hint of maturity. At this time, when she raised her head and looked at Yang Qindong, who was more than a head taller than her, the stubbornness on her face was very cute and lovable. "No reason, this is an order." Yang Qindong's face became serious, and after finishing his words, he left in a huff. Without a satisfactory explanation, Junko's face was full of displeasure. But she couldn't say anything because as early as when she first entered the academy, Yang Qindong said that she had to obey orders and follow instructions. Anyone who dared to break this rule would be mercilessly kicked out of the academy. This was not as simple as a deduction of points. Even with 100 points for conduct, more than half of the students were still expelled. Looking at their reluctant expressions as they left, Junko felt a little sad. With these lessons learned, she didn't dare to disobey Yang Qindong's orders and be kicked out of the academy. Yang Qindong went to the 4th Battalion commander, Wu Sheng. "I'll give you 2 platoons to stay at home. Remember, no matter who it is, if they don't listen to the advice and want to enter the manor, there is no need to be polite. Just shoot them to death." Tiger's Mane. As soon as he finished speaking, Tiger's Mane appeared from the side and handed over a machine gun that weighed about 8 kilograms. Yang Qindong reached out and took it. After familiarizing himself with it for a while, he personally handed it to Wu Sheng. "This is the Type 9 machine gun for Squad 5. The gun is 840 millimeters long. The gun weighs 395 kilograms. The muzzle velocity is 970 meters per second. The caliber is 5.8 millimeters. The bullet capacity is 75 rounds. And the effective range is 800 m. I'll leave it to you for the time being. If a large number of enemies appear, wipe them out. Yes, sweep his mother," Wu Sheng said with a face full of excitement. When he first joined the Cold Front, Yang Qindong said that there would be more advanced and more powerful machine guns in the future. They would be able to wipe out a large number of enemies in one shot. Once they started fighting, one person would be able to guard the main road and prevent the enemy from advancing. When he first heard about it, Wu Sheng was very excited. He had a strong body and was quite strong. He thought that this opportunity would be most suitable for him to use. Now, his long-time dream had finally come true. Although this machine gun wasn't heavy and had appeared on the battlefield against the wall of cavalry, it wasn't the more powerful heavy machine gun that the young master had mentioned. However, even if it was a light machine gun, being able to use it once was something to be proud of. In the future, he would have something to brag about in front of the other Cold Front members. He had no choice but to take out the light machine gun for Squad 95. Tonight, he was facing a group of fugitives. God knows what they would do. It was never wrong to be more prepared just in case. Because of the lack of time and limited information, Yang Qindong's operation this time couldn't be perfect. But it didn't matter. With his powerful strength and the unknown advanced firearms in his warehouse, He only needed to charge forward. He really had a heroic aura of, no matter how far you come, I'll go all the way. Leaving behind 2 squads of Cold Front members and 2 bases of ammunition, the Yang Clan Manor's defenses were raised by more than 1 level. Unless a large number of enemies charged at them with no regard for their lives, they were more than enough to deal with a few stragglers. While he was giving some instructions to Wu Sheng, the students had finished gathering. Yang Qindong led a platoon of Cold Front members and joined them. They left the Yang Clan Manor and headed toward the capital. In the inner courtyard of the Yang Clan Manor, Huyen Qiao Yin, Lady Shui, Lady Xiang, and Yang Duo were all out of bed. Even though it was late at night, none of them were sleepy. As women, there was a limit to what they could do in such a situation. They could only pray in their hearts that their husband and brother would return safely. In reality, it was just suppressing bandits. They would definitely be fine. At the Yongding Gate, at the southern gate of the capital, the commander of the 5 cities warden's office, Sun Tong, was leading a group of soldiers to welcome Yang Qindong. Sun Tong had originally been a rank 6 soldier, but after defeating Walla's army, he had been promoted to rank 5. This was all thanks to Yang Qindong, and his heart was filled with boundless gratitude. This time, he had taken the initiative to stand up and say that he would work with the Loyalty Duke to get this job. At the gate, Yang Qindong saw Sun Tong waiting for him and stepped forward with a smile. "You've worked hard." "It's not hard at all. Working with the Loyalty Duke reinvigorates my entire body." Sun Tong chuckled, revealing a row of white teeth beneath his tanned face. Sensing that Sun Tong was revealing his true feelings, Yang Qindong patted him on the shoulder. "Good. People made mistakes." For example, Sun Tong had betrayed Yang Qindong because he had secretly passed on the information to Jining. Fortunately, he had been able to return and was determined to know which side he was on. In Yang Qindong's eyes, such a person was a talent that could be nurtured. As soon as his palm touched Sun Tong's shoulder, his eyes lit up with excitement. He knew that the Loyalty Duke had approved of him. This made him even more determined to make the decision he had just made. It had been said before that those who could become the commander of the 5 cities warden's office were all shrewd people. Otherwise, they would not have been able to secure their positions. Weighing the pros and cons like this, how to balance the various forces to the satisfaction of everyone, this was an extremely profound study. Under the influence of such an environment, Sun Tong chose to hug the tree and not let go. He was determined to cling to Jin Ying's thigh. This way, he would be able to secure the position of Taiping. This way of thinking was not wrong. Under Jin Ying's protection, it would be extremely difficult for others to touch him. But everything had its pros and cons. Wanting to rely on this relationship to advance was also extremely difficult. This was because there were too many people relying on Jining, and most of them held important positions. In comparison, the small 5 cities warden's office was too small. It was so small that Jining could sacrifice herself at any time. It was also destined that there would not be too many resources placed on him. Because of this, when they had defeated the Walla and given out rewards, many important officials close to Jining had obtained many benefits and promotions for various reasons. But Sun Tong, who had made great contributions, had only been promoted by half a rank. He had risen from grade 6 to grade 5, and his position had not changed at all. It was impossible to say that this matter had not affected Sun Tong. Why was it that those officials who only knew how to sit in their manners were able to obtain such great benefits, while he, a person who was in the middle of the situation, risked his life and only obtained such small benefits? Unable to understand, he began to have other thoughts. Gradually, Sun Tong's mentality changed. He was no longer so eager to work for Jining. He began to consider where he would go in the future. It was at this time that orders came from above. They said that they would transfer people temporarily under the command of the Duke of Loyalty. They said that they were going to destroy some Jianghu gang. It was as if someone had handed over a lamp in the dark night. It instantly illuminated Sun Tong's path and allowed him to see new hope. After a mental struggle, he finally made up his mind. He would give up on Jining and rely on the Duke of Loyalty. Perhaps at the moment, this was not a wise path. But unless he wanted to muddle along for the rest of his life, if he wanted to stand out, it would be difficult to find any other choice. With such thoughts, when Sun Tong appeared in front of Yang Chendong again, his attitude had changed completely. His sincere respect could be felt by anyone. The two armies converged together. They held torches like a fire dragon and quickly passed through the streets and alleys. They arrived at Heijing Street near dawn. Many bailiffs and constables from the Supreme Court had already surrounded the place. From a distance, there was a guard post every 3 meters and a sentry every 5 steps. It was as if they had surrounded the place like an iron bucket. The person from the Supreme Court in charge of this operation was a deputy of the Supreme Court named Wang Bo. He was a secondary class, level 6 official. Seeing Yang Chendong arrive, he quickly bowed and said respectfully, "Wang Bo greets the Duke of Loyalty. How is the situation?" Yang Chendong did not give Wang Bo a second glance. Instead, he cast his gaze to the front. Looking at the quiet street, he could not help but let out a cold laugh. Heijing Street was one of the most difficult and complicated factions to control. Who knew how many criminals with lives on their hands were hidden here? There were also many Jianghu characters who were used to living here temporarily. How could such a place be so lightly guarded? Even if it was before dawn, with an army surrounding it, it couldn't be that there wasn't even the slightest bit of movement. And now, everything was so quiet, even more so than usual. This could only mean that the other party had long since known about this and was already on guard. Replying to the Duke of Loyalty, "I have already sent people to surround this place," but Wang Bo seemed to want to say something, but stopped. Chapter 306. But what about it? Yang Chendong originally thought that the other party would be dignified and might even ask for credit because of this. It was not impossible. Facing Yang Chendong's curiosity, Wang Bo seemed to hesitate for a moment, then said, as if he had made up his mind, "But according to this official's experience, these bandits should have been alerted a long time ago, or else they wouldn't have been so quiet. I'm afraid that someone else has already passed on the message." Oh, he thought that this was just an official sent by the Supreme Court, and that he was only cooperating with him on the surface to clear his relationship with him. He didn't think that he would have such knowledge. Most importantly, what he said was the truth. While Yang Chendong was puzzled, Sun Tong walked up and whispered in his ear, "This official knows this Wang Bo. He is quite capable, but because of his poor family background, he didn't have the money to send gifts to the higher-ups, so he has been ostracized and hasn't been promoted." After saying this, Sun Tong took the initiative to retreat to the side. He believed that he had explained the situation quite thoroughly. As expected, Yang Chendong nodded as if he understood everything. However, he definitely wouldn't be reassured by just a few words from others. Therefore, he continued to question Wang Bo. "Lord Wang, now that things have come to this, what do you think we should do next?" If this official is so bold, I would like to ask the Duke of Loyalty to take back the order. We will leave for now and wait for the right time to strike." Wang Bo hesitated, thinking about the huge distance between them and how to phrase his next words. But when he thought about it, with his ability, if he thought of something and made a hint, he would be overestimating himself. Now wasn't the time to play any tricks, so he might as well say it directly. This way, after expressing his loyalty, he would have no regrets about how things would develop. Wang Bo actually advised Yang Qindong to take back the order to attack. Sun Tong was startled at first, then he bluntly reprimanded. "How dare you say such things in front of the Duke of Loyalty? What are your intentions?" Even though Sun Tong was a military officer, he was still a secondary class, rank 5. He had the right to reprimand Wang Bo, who was a secondary class, rank 6. Most importantly, he had already gained the initial approval of Yang Qindong, so it was even more reasonable for him to say such words at this moment. "I was too rash." After being pointed out by Sun Tong, Wang Bo hurriedly admitted his mistake. Yang Qindong, who was standing at the side, naturally chuckled. How could he not see that the two of them were clearly putting on a show here? Since Sun Pong had spoken up for Wang Bo before, it was clear that they knew each other and even had some friendship. At this moment, he was only saying these words to offend the other party. Wang Bo naturally knew this, so he stopped at a certain point. He quickly stopped talking and expressed that he knew he was wrong. Everyone had their own schemes, and it was understandable to use them appropriately. Yang Qindong didn't want to comment on this. Since he knew the truth, he casually waved his hand and said, "Forget it, Official Wang also had good intentions." Hearing these words, Sun Tong and Wang Bo both let out sighs of relief. It was good that they weren't blamed. Moreover, hearing the meaning of these words, the Duke of Loyalty understood everything. Since it was like this, then the operation tonight could be cancelled. Thinking about it, it made sense. Originally, they were playing a sneak attack. Since the other party already knew of their movements and had made preparations in advance, there was already no meaning in talking about a sneak attack. Just as Sun Tong and Wang Bo were thinking about canceling tonight's operation and returning without any results, Yang Qindong said with an extremely calm tone, "The other party is a bandit. We are officials. Since it is like this, how can officials be afraid of bandits? Since we have come, who cares if they have made preparations or not? This time, we can't just go back like this. Pass down the order for everyone to make preparations. We will attack in an hour." Even though he knew this, he still acted as usual. Yang Qindong's actions and decision made Sun Tong and Wang Bo both stunned. The two opened their mouths wide and wanted to say something. For example, if the enemy had received the news, would they have already left through the secret passage? If they killed their way in step by step, what was the use? Apart from losing the lives of some of their brothers, was there no other use? Or was the Duke of Loyalty also fishing for fame and didn't want to do anything with the Blackwater gang? Was all this just to save face? At this moment, the two seemed to have 100,000 questions in their hearts, but they didn't know how to ask. Yang Qindong didn't give any explanation to the two's confusion. He believed that facts spoke louder than words. Everything that happened next would naturally tell them whether what they were doing now was right or wrong. "Come, bring the walkie-talkie over." As soon as his voice fell, Tiger's Mane had already stood behind Yang Qindong with a black, iron-like object on his back. However, Yang Qindong didn't touch this guy immediately. Instead, he turned around and looked at the dozens of academy students he brought with him and said, "Watch carefully. What does it mean to be irresistible? What does it mean to be unable to withstand a single blow? You also need to know that sometimes using the right method will have an effect. You need to know that in the face of absolute strength, any conspiracy or trick is fragile and useless." After hearing the Mountainhead's words, the dozens of students all opened their eyes wide and nodded. Then they looked forward with bright eyes. At this moment, their spiritual energy was highly concentrated, as if they were afraid that they would miss something important if they weren't careful. However, after reprimanding these words, Yang Qindong had already reached out and held the walkie-talkie in his hand. Then he said in a very firm and confident voice, "Tingshan, this is number 1. Are you ready? Reporting to number 1, Tingshan is ready and can attack at any time. Please give your orders. At this moment, another voice suddenly came out from the metal object. This shocked Sun Tong and Wang Bo so much that they almost jumped up. It was enough to show that they were really frightened. Okay, number 1, launch the attack. The time limit is 15 minutes. Don't stop. Begin. Tingshan Roger, Tingshan Roger. The conversation ended for the time being, and there was no more sound coming from the metal object. Just as Sun Tong and Wang Bo were wondering how this thing could make a sound, a shocking scene suddenly appeared in front of them. Flames soared into the sky, and thunder roared. Torrential flames suddenly appeared in front of their eyes. The rumbling sound was like thunder from the ninth heaven falling in front of them, causing the earth to tremble. The hot air that rushed toward them seemed to be able to roast them, causing them to involuntarily step back to avoid the heat. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. The sound of cannon fire could be heard incessantly, and one after another, flames soared into the sky. It was like the end of the world, and it was more like the heavens were angry and spitting out huge fireballs one after another. In an instant, Blackwell Street was completely submerged in flames. Sun Tong was dumbfounded, Wang Bo was dumbfounded, and the group of academy students were dumbfounded. Even Tiger Man, Lung Feng, and the others who were mentally prepared were also dumbfounded. They thought that since the young master had a card up his sleeve, he would definitely have a way to solve the problem in front of them. However, they did not expect that he would use such a direct method to bombard with the cannons. Moreover, this kind of bombardment was not the ordinary kind. After each shot, they would rest for a while. It was just like what they used to deal with the Walla cavalry. This was a bombardment of cannons. Under the continuous attacks, the entire street would probably be completely destroyed. Not even a single blade of grass would be left. Not even a single person would be left alive. In the loud sound of cannon fire, Blackwell Street in front of them became a sea of fire. At a close distance, they could even hear the miserable cries coming from inside. The people in Blackwell Street had indeed received the news in advance, and Huaihai had made some preparations for this. For example, they would first divide their forces into 3 groups and prepare countermeasures. Then, they would mobilize all the Jianghu people and fugitives on the streets, telling them that the imperial court would kill them, and in order to protect themselves and preserve their last piece of pure land, what they had to do was to fight against reason and beat the invaders out. This was to tell others that this was their territory, and that no one was allowed to invade, much less have any ideas about it. Otherwise, only death awaited them. Those who could become the boss usually had a certain ability to stir up people's hearts. Huaihai was like this. When he waved his arm and promised many benefits, he received a response from the crowd as expected. Next, the entire Blackwell Street could be said to be fully prepared for a face-to-face battle with the Ming army that rushed in. There were long spears, short knives, iron rods, silver whips, and some long bows and short crossbows. There were countless traps everywhere. They were just waiting for the Ming army to appear and kill them. However, they did not expect that Yang Qindong had no intention of fighting with them at close range. He directly switched to long-range artillery and ignored the various preparations of the opponent. He used hot weapons against cold weapons to overwhelm them. It could also be said that he was bullying them. There were ways to deal with people, and there were ways to deal with animals. This was Yang Qindong's style of doing things. Just like when he faced the Walla army, he might have been able to severely injure them. However, in order to achieve his own goals, he did not do that. Instead, he focused on shocking them in order to leave a strong enemy in the north for the great Ming dynasty. He did not want to give up all the good bows and arrows. The facts also proved that Yang Qindong's method was correct. The existence of the Walla's main force did indeed put a lot of pressure on Zhu Qiu, so he did not dare to wholeheartedly rectify the internal situation. Naturally, he could not raise his sword to attack Zhu Qiyu. For a time, the business with the Walla also limited his thoughts of fully developing the military. He could make a lot of money, and so on. Chapter 307. He had shown mercy to the people of Walla because it was related to the overall situation. However, he would not show any mercy to these evil forces who dared to provoke him. There were no longer any commoners in Blackwell Street. Those who stayed there were either fugitives with a life or members of the Jianghu with evil intentions. They could no longer be regarded as human beings. Since that was the case, why would he need to show any mercy to them? All he needed to do was fight, since he was ready to fight. How to obtain the greatest victory with the least cost was the problem that Yang Qindong had to consider. His opponent was so strong that he did not care about his life, especially when he had made preparations beforehand. Under such circumstances, if he just attacked blindly, he would lose many people. Furthermore, there were rumors of a secret passage. It was very likely that even if he paid the price and charged in, he might not be able to kill the main culprit. If he could not remove the root of the problem, then the danger would be even greater. At that time, the enemy would be in the dark while he was in the light. The feeling of being on guard for 1,000 days would be very unpleasant. Yang Qindong was not an indecisive person. When he could act swiftly and decisively, he would not be wishy-washy. Therefore, he directly chose to cover the area with cannon fire. Not only would he be able to beat up his opponent, but he would also be able to intimidate the other officials. He believed that after this incident, anyone who had any ideas about him would have to consider the consequences, right? Imperial City, Imperial Palace. The Earth Dragon has turned over. Quickly find a place to hide. Don't panic, don't panic. The cannon fire continued and landed on the ground. Even the Imperial Palace was shaken. Some experienced people shouted that it was an earthquake. Therefore, the entire Imperial Palace was in chaos. It was 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, which was also the time when people were in deep sleep. The sudden tremors woke some people from their dreams and caused chaos. Even Dai Zong Zhu Qiyu, who was sleeping with a concubine in the bedchamber, was awakened by the tremors. Then she instinctively rolled to the ground and hid under the dragon bed. "Your Majesty, your Majesty." The concubine was still shouting from the bed. Outside the door, Jining also rushed in, her voice urgent. The people in the Imperial Palace, regardless of their occupation or status, had to do one thing if they wanted to live a better life, and that was to gain the trust and recognition of the emperor. Once something happened to the emperor, these people would be like rootless duckweeds. In the end, they would be washed to the side by the waves and wither away, becoming a complete waste. Therefore, the emperor's safety also represented the safety of many people. Shouts rang out everywhere. Zhu Qiyu, who was hiding under the bed, said with a hint of panic in her voice, "We are here, we are here. My beloved subject, quickly find a place to hide." "Hide?" "Yes, yes." Jining and the concubine both agreed. Then they each found a seemingly safe place to hide. They prayed in their hearts, praying that the Earth Dragon would flip over quickly to ensure their safety. The ground trembled, and the rumbling continued for about an hour before it finally stopped. Then the entire palace became extremely quiet. Even so, Zhu Qiyu had no intention of crawling out from under the bed. He had read many ancient books. Once there was an earthquake, it was often continuous. It was not so easy to stop it. He was still thinking that it would be better to stay like this and wait for the sky to completely brighten before finding a spacious and safe place. However, this idea was completely changed with the entrance of a young eunuch. "Your Majesty, your Majesty." A little eunuch stumbled as he ran in. When he entered the door, he almost tripped over the slightly high threshold because he was in such a hurry and fell to the ground. "What are you doing? How can you be so flustered in front of the emperor?" Jean Ying's eyes were sharp. With the help of the candlelight in the bedchamber, she saw that the young eunuch was one of her trusted aides. She pretended to be angry and asked. The young eunuch finally saw Jean Ying. He hurriedly knelt on the ground and said anxiously, "Eunuch, the earth dragon did not flip over. It was the Duke of Loyalty and Courage who was having sex." "What do you mean by having sex? What exactly is going on?" Jean Ying only heard a little more clearly after the young eunuch repeated it twice. However, she was also puzzled. She had seen cannons being fired before. The artillery battalion of the great Ming dynasty had fired 2 cannons when it was first built. Although the noise was not small, it was still within an acceptable range. How could it be like this time, where the sound was as loud as thunder and the earth trembled because of it? Yes, it was indeed having sex. "We sent someone to follow the Duke of Loyalty and Courage to bring back the news," the young eunuch said solemnly. He looked as if he was willing to guarantee it with his life. It was really having sex. Jean Ying also knew that the young eunuch under her command would not dare to say anything about this kind of thing. Thinking back, the sound was as loud as thunder, and the earth trembled. However, it seemed that was all there was to it. The house did not shake. It really did not seem like the earth dragon flipping over, as people usually said. "Yes, yes." The young eunuch hurriedly nodded and said, "All right, since that is the case, go and investigate. If there is any news, immediately report back." Jean Ying waved her hand. If what she said was the truth, then her performance was a bit too exaggerated. Of course, she could not let too many people see her losing her composure, especially when the emperor was still under the dragon bed. This kind of scene could not be seen by anyone else. The young eunuch accepted the order and left. Without anyone else around, Jean Ying also came to the side of the dragon bed. Then she said in a small voice, "Your Majesty, there is something strange about this matter. I'm afraid it was not the earth dragon flipping over." "Oh, Shun will come out now." Zhu Qiyu, who was hiding under the dragon bed, had heard the young eunuch's voice. Although he did not believe that all of this was caused by the cannons, since there was a report, it should not have been the earth dragon flipping over. Thus, it was not appropriate for him to hide under the bed. No matter what, he was the emperor of a dynasty. When Zhu Qiyu climbed out from under the bed, he first tidied up his pajamas. Then he straightened his body and resumed the posture of an emperor. However, he had no intention of returning to the dragon bed. Instead, he began to change his clothes with the help of his concubines. The young eunuch left quickly and returned even faster. Perhaps the report from below was also fast. As soon as he changed into the dragon robe, he rushed back. However, this time, he was clearly not as flustered. Instead, he knelt on the ground a few feet away and said, "Reporting to your Majesty, the people below have reported that it was indeed the Duke of Loyalty who was firing the cannons. Marquis Woking Hao has also come. He is waiting outside the palace for an audience." "Oh, the Hall of Harmony receives him." Zhu Qiyu nodded. He also had a bad feeling in his heart. Since the sound of the cannons was so loud, its power would not be small. What was this Duke of Loyalty up to? In the Hall of Harmony, when Zhu Qiyu appeared in his new dragon robe, Shi Heng, the commander of the 3 armies, and Ming, the minister of war, had already knelt on the ground. As soon as they saw the emperor's face, they kowtowed and said, "Your Majesty, I am guilty." "Forget it." Zhu Qiyu, who looked a little unhappy, seemed to want to say something, but in the end, he just waved his hand and looked powerless. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Shi Hang and Ming were in charge of the army, and the other was in charge of the equipment and logistics of the Ministry of War. Now, the sound of the cannons suddenly came out like an earthquake in the city. They did not know before, so they had to bear the crime of dereliction of duty. If the emperor wanted to, it was possible that he could use this reason to replace them. In this way, they had to admit their guilt. At least they had a positive attitude. It was impossible to say that Zhu Qiyu did not have a little anger in his heart. He was the emperor, the master of the world. But when did something happen that even the master did not know about? But although he was angry, there was no better person to use. Fortunately, whether it was Shi Hang or Ming, they were still loyal. Since that was the case, what harm was there in forgiving them this once? With a temper and patience that had no choice but to tolerate everything, Zhu Qiyu sat on the dragon throne with Jin Ying's help. Then he looked at the two kneeling people in the hall with a heavy gaze. Tell me, what is going on? And how are you going to deal with it? If such cannons suddenly fall on the imperial palace, how will I deal with it? Zhu Qiyu could not be blamed for being so cautious. His life was already threatened. If it were anyone else, they would not be able to remain calm. When these words were asked, Shi Hang and Ming both had bitter expressions on their faces. What happened tonight was indeed somewhat out of their expectations. They originally thought that the Duke of Loyalty had the support of the mercenaries and could not be underestimated. But if they really did fight, there was nothing to be afraid of. The enemy's advantage was that they had good firearms, but their disadvantage was also very obvious. They had too few soldiers. If a fight really broke out and the 150,000 recruits of the capital charged out, each person's spit would drown the enemy. At that time, no matter how advanced one's weapons were, one would not be able to escape the misfortune of being completely surrounded. It was only because the mercenaries were not to be trifled with, and Yang Qindong's existence could effectively intimidate Walla and Zhu Qizhen that there was a need to keep this person alive. This was why they had not truly fallen out with him. Tonight's matter had caused the two, who had been very confident, to instantly panic. They seemed to have suddenly realized that the matter was not as easy to resolve as they had imagined, and the situation seemed to have become even more grim, putting aside everything else. Just the sound of the earth dragon turning over was not something they could withstand. And if their guess was correct, this was the work of the mercenaries. Then just how many more tricks did they have that they had yet to reveal? Attributing all the credit to the mercenaries could be considered a modern Q spirit. With this thought, they comforted themselves and hoped that the situation would not be too bad. For example, once they had a good relationship with the mercenaries, wouldn't they be able to use these powerful firearms? If that was the case, a bad thing would become a good thing. Chapter 308. Thinking of this, Ming spoke first. Your Majesty, the power of the new cannons is so great that they should be provided by the mercenaries. I beg you to contact them. If they can obtain such powerful cannons, it would be your Majesty's good fortune, the great Ming's good fortune, and the people's good fortune. Hearing that he could also have such firearms, Zhu Qiyu was immediately interested. Beloved official are you confident? Your Majesty, the mercenaries are only after money. As long as we agree to their demands, it shouldn't be difficult. After all, there is no conflict of interest between us, and from the facts, they have no intention of becoming enemies with us. I think it is feasible. Ming knew that this was not the time to hesitate, so he spoke of his speculation as reality. Good, since that is the case, beloved official beloved official Jean, I will leave this matter to the two of you. Remember, as long as the other party's demands are not too excessive, you can agree to them. Zhu Qiyu's face was bright as he spoke. He had even begun to imagine what it would be like if he had such firearms. At that time, he could first unify the great Ming and defeat his imperial brother, Zhu Qizhen. Then, he could even personally lead an army to the Walla. The humiliation he had suffered before would be another description and praise in the history books. As for placing Jining among them, this was one of Zhu Qiyu's methods of self-protection. After all, the power of the cannons was too great, so great that it could threaten his life at any time. Since this was the case, he had to have it in his hands. Otherwise, he would not be able to sleep peacefully in the future. After Ming spoke of the cannons, the kneeling Shiheng also spoke. "Your Majesty, everything is ready. I suggest that the soldiers of the Datong Prefecture, the Kaiping Guard, and the Guangning Guard be replaced with the soldiers of the capital. I ask for your Majesty's permission." This is something that has already been discussed. Since beloved official Shi has mentioned it, we will immediately do it. Zhu Qiyu was well aware of the change in guard that had been planned for a period of time. She originally wanted to wait for a while before discussing it, but since Shiheng mentioned it now, she decided to get it done immediately. Speaking of which, the change of guard this time was very confidential. Only the Emperor Zhu Qiyu, Chief Eunuch Jining, and Marquis Wuqinghao Shiheng knew about it. Even the Minister of War, Ming, was kept in the dark. Now, when he heard the conversation between the Emperor and Shiheng, he, who was kneeling on the side, was confused. Fortunately, Shiheng gave him a look which meant that he would explain this matter later. This prevented Ming from feeling that he had been excluded from the highest authority. One was to build a good relationship with the mercenaries and have deeper contact with them. The other was to change the defense of the army. After the conclusion of the two matters, the discussion about tonight's bombardment in the imperial palace also ended. As for what would happen next, they would discuss it after seeing the results of tomorrow's battle. Zhu Qiyu turned and walked towards her sleeping quarters. There was still some time, so she could go back to sleep. Jining followed her step by step. Leaving Shiheng and Ming behind, she walked backwards out of Zhanghe Palace. As soon as he stepped out of the hall, Ming straightened his stooped body and asked curiously, "Governor Shi, can you tell me more about the change of guard?" "Haha, of course." Shiheng had a smile on his face. Once the guard was changed, many things would be involved. He needed the support of the Ministry of War, and there were some things that needed to be explained. Actually, His Majesty just casually mentioned it. I'm sure that Minister of Rights also knows about it. After defeating Walla, some people's reputations are too great. In addition, they saved more than 70,000 soldiers from Walla's army. Most of these people have returned to being soldiers and heroes. They are all grateful for a certain person's great kindness. Does Minister of Rights think that His Majesty can use this kind of army without worry? That's why His Majesty decided to change the guard. Ming was extremely intelligent and immediately understood the crux of the matter. Once the guard was changed, the soldiers coming in were from other guard posts. They had not received the kindness of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage, so they could be used without worry. Yes, this time, the Emperor was willing to use money to change the guard, and the constant waves of conscription in the capital were even suppressed by His Majesty precisely for this reason. To tell the truth, the majority of those people who were forcibly conscripted into the army were commoners who were convinced of someone's strength. Leaving these people in the capital would be an unstable factor, so I used this chance to get rid of them. Shiheng chuckled. So what if you, Yang Qindong, are formidable? In the end, the situation was still in the Emperor's hands. No matter how many good deeds you did, and how many people you bought, once the people were changed, your reputation would gradually fade away. Ming finally understood what was going on and sighed. His Majesty's move is truly formidable, taking away the firewood from under the cauldron. Right. What about the Blackwell Street matter? I was hoping that they'd cause some trouble, but it seems that we were happy for nothing. Let's drop this matter. After all, we didn't lose anything. This was sure Heng's matter. With this voice, the two figures gradually faded into the distance, ultimately vanishing from the imperial city, returning to an hour ago. Blackwell Street. Hu Huaihai, the boss of the Blackwater gang, was sitting in a room with a secret passage. He was listening to the intelligence gathered by his subordinates. For example, the entire street had been surrounded by people sent by the Supreme Court, and a large number of officers and soldiers were swarming in this direction. Second Master Wu Yong had long ago analyzed all of this, so Hu Huaihai naturally knew what was going on. It was precisely for this reason that he was in no hurry, only lightly nodding to indicate that he understood. He gave off the feeling that everything was within his plan, and his subordinates trusted him even more. In fact, Hu Huaihai was also prepared. On the entire Blackwell Street, the Blackwater gang had at least 500 people set up an ambush. In addition to some desperados and notorious Jianghu people who sought refuge here, there were at least 1,000 people, and all of them had some skills. They were not people that ordinary soldiers could deal with. In addition to the geographical advantage, it would be even more difficult for the Duke of Loyalty to deal with him, and it would be impossible for him to do so without paying a heavy price. Not to mention that even if the situation was more dangerous, he could leave through the secret passage, and then second brother and third brother would take action. What danger would there be? At this moment, he could even see the scene of Yang Qindong being killed. It was precisely because of these backup plans and plans that Hu Huaihai's face was naturally calm and fearless at this moment. However, all of this was changed by the earth-shaking rumble of cannons. Seemingly without warning, just when the villains on Blackwell Street were ready to fight a bloody battle at any time and cause the soldiers to be rebuffed, there were suddenly streaks of fire whizzing down from the sky, followed by a deafening sound that could shatter one's eardrums. Before anyone could react, and was still in a daze, wondering what was going on, powerful cannonballs landed on Blackwell Street, landing beside the villains. Then, with a sudden boom, they turned into streaks of huge air currents and flames that engulfed them one by one. The rumble of the cannonballs shattered the understanding of these villains. Just when they thought that the Ming army would launch a charge, and they were waiting, the cannonballs that fell from the sky, and the cannonballs that could form a radius of several feet as soon as they landed on the ground struck all of their confidence and self-esteem into nothingness. They were struck until there was nothing left, nothing at all. Even Hu Huaihai, who was waiting quietly in the room, was frightened by the sound of the cannonballs. After a full 10 breaths, he seemed to have woken up from a dream. The first thing he did was to quickly rush toward the entrance of the secret passage, thinking, "It's over, it's over, it's all over." Hu Huaihai's reaction was not slow. His body nimbly slipped into the secret passage. But in the face of this kind of aimless cannonball that completely covered everything, the so-called secret passage was not safe. This was because at this moment, a cannonball landed beside the small courtyard. The powerful shock caused a huge pit to appear in the ground. Under such power, the secret passage naturally collapsed. This boss of the Blackwater gang, who could cover the sky with one hand on Blackwell Street and even had no regard for the law, was blocked in the secret passage. Then, a large amount of dust pressed down on his body. He shouted and screamed, flailing his arms and legs, but all of this could not change the fact that he was drowned. A suffocating feeling swept through his body. At this moment, perhaps there was only one thought in his mind, and that was regret. If he could redo his life, he would definitely not choose to offend the Duke of Loyalty. The sound of the cannonball rang out, spreading far and wide. Third Master Chi Lu's group, that was rushing toward the Yang village, could not help but stop. Looking back, based on his intuition, he could tell that the cannonball should have landed in the direction of Blackwell Street. He could not help but frown. But the straightforward third Master Qi did not intend to stop the operation. In his view, he had lost face and was actually injured in the hands of a small servant. This hatred had to be avenged. Otherwise, where would he put his face? How would he be able to establish a foothold in the Jianghu in the future? It was precisely because of this worthless face that Qi Lu did not intend to retreat, even though he knew that the situation had changed. He led a total of 200 brothers of the Blackwater Gang to the Yang village that was 15 li south of the capital. The outer courtyard of the Yang village, Battalion Commander Wu Sheng, who was ordered to wait here, saw huge bursts of fire coming from the direction of the capital and heard the sound of cannonballs. He said excitedly, "The young master has made his move. Next, it's up to us, brothers. Everyone, listen up. Once the enemy appears, don't hesitate to beat them up. Beat them up until even their parents can't recognize them." Chapter 309. Yes. 2 platoons of 60 people from Cold Vanguard answered in unison, followed by the crisp sound of gun bolts being pulled. Who knew how many times they had trained for such a battle? The Cold Vanguards were already familiar with it. Even the hands holding the guns did not tremble in the slightest. This was the benefit of being an elite. All along, Yang Qindong had been walking the path of elite soldiers. After going from the front lines to the military supply department, he knew how big the expenditure of a large army was. At that time, he was really shocked. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was an astronomical figure. It was because he knew how much money was needed to sustain an army that he had to train the most elite Cold Vanguards. Quality was more important than quantity. This was to reduce the financial losses while at the same time they could do more things. Now, it seemed that he had made the right choice. At least the Cold Vanguards were extremely elite. On the battlefield, with advanced firearms, 1 against 10 or even dozens of people would not be a problem. This was only the strength of one Cold Vanguard. If many Cold Vanguards were to gather together, they would be able to display even more dazzling and unbelievable results. The Cold Vanguards were already prepared. They were only waiting for the enemy to appear. And as expected, the enemy, Qi Lu, really came. Along the way, they were very careful, afraid of causing a bigger commotion. Leading a group of experts, Third Master Qi was full of confidence. Although there weren't many of them, only less than 200 of them. These were people who had walked through mountains of swords and seas of fire. To them, killing people was like child's play. Once they were allowed to rush into the Yang family manor, one could imagine what kind of hell it would become. He had long heard that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage had 4 beautiful women. At this moment, Qi Lu only felt restless. He had even thought of leaving one for himself, one for his second brother, and the other 2 for his eldest brother. This should be enough to prove his filial piety. With such a beautiful but impossible wish, the group of people arrived outside the Yang family manor on a spacious piece of land. Originally, there were some weeds here, but for the sake of a better field of vision, Lung Feng had long made this place barren. This way, if any enemy approached, this place would become the first line of life and death, restricting the enemy's approach and reaping their lives. The Blackwater Gang had investigated this matter, and they even knew that this open space served as a barrier. However, in the eyes of these people who were agile and knew that wealth came from danger, no one took him seriously. If they rushed forward, they would be able to obtain riches and honor. If he couldn't charge up, he would die, and his soul would disappear. This was very fair. This was the understanding that everyone had engraved in their minds. Even though they knew what the consequences would be, everyone only hesitated for a moment when they arrived in front of the empty space. After they had adjusted their breathing, under Qi Lu's command, they flew up and charged forward. Their speed was fast, and with the cover of the night, They were charging over a large area. In their opinion, even if the young manor was aware, it would be impossible to stop all of them in such a short period of time. Once half, or even half of the people charged into the manor, it would be their world. Everything would be under their control. Qilu's plan was very good. When he charged, he didn't charge at the front, but instead, he hid in the middle of the group. His past experience told him that the people in the middle were usually the safest. At least, they could attack and retreat. However, when the group truly launched their attack, everything was completely different from what he had imagined. Attack! Seeing the black shadows approaching, Battalion Commander Wu Sheng, who was hidden in the darkness and had 2 platoons of soldiers by his side, gave an order. 60 soldiers of the Cold Vanguard aimed their guns at the empty space in front of them at the same time. Then there was a series of crackling sounds like firecrackers. Streaks of fire were shot out from their muzzles, flying straight out and accurately hitting the black shadows in the distance. What was a harvester? What was a tornado? What was a barren land? The current scene was a good example of this. As the concentrated gunshots rang out, the black figures that were running forward fell to the ground one by one. Puddles of fresh blood blossomed, as if they were worthless, causing the originally clean ground to be left with patches of blood stains and crimson fresh blood. Holding the Type 95 class machine gun in his hand, Battalion Commander Wu Sheng's right index finger kept moving. 2, 2, 2. Bullet shells flew in all directions, and the black shadows fell to the ground. Among them, there were some whose faces were filled with unwillingness, some whose eyes widened in shock, and some who didn't even have the chance to show any expression before they fell into a pool of blood and died. Of course, there were more black shadows that fell to the ground after hearing the gunshots. Among them was Qilu, Master Qi-san. He already knew that the mercenaries' guns were powerful, so he was mentally prepared. But when he saw that no less than 56 people had died, and more than 30 people were injured, Qilu still couldn't accept this result. But there were some things that had already been done, so there was no room for regret. Just like now, since he had already rushed out, he couldn't even retreat now. Everyone listen up. Move forward carefully and lower your body. Whoever rushes into the manor first will be rewarded with 500 taels of silver by the boss. When there was a great reward, there would definitely be brave men. Knowing that there was no way out, Qilu issued a great reward. At that moment, the black-clothed people that were originally lying on the ground seemed to have come back to life. One by one, they started to crawl forward, just like how Lung Feng's subordinates crawled forward during training. Crawling like a dog. Interesting. Battalion Commander Wu Sheng, who was more than 100 meters away, used the night vision device to clearly see the performance of Qilu and the others. When he saw how imperfect they were when crawling forward, and how some of them even had their buttocks raised high, he couldn't help but laugh out loud. Fortunately, they were the enemy. If they were his subordinates, and their movements were so imperfect, he would have stomped on them long ago. Come on, brothers. The competition has begun. Let's see who gets the most hits. When we return, it will be recorded clearly in the merit book. Now, let's start with Class 1. Remember, you only have one chance. After that, it will be Class 2. No one is allowed to fight, and no one is allowed to mess around. Whoever breaks the rules will have their merit taken away. Wu Sheng's voice was sometimes serious, but sometimes excited. He treated the actual battle in front of him as a training exercise, a military exercise. With such a relaxed attitude, the other Lung Feng members were also relaxed, and they were able to show their best side. Class 1, get ready. Fire. Bang, bang, bang. 10 gunshots rang out, and 7 of the crawling black-clothed people stopped moving in an instant. Class 1, 7 people have been hit in the first round. Class 2, get ready. Wu Sheng's voice rang out in a timely manner. What followed was Class 2's first round of shooting. Another 6 black-clothed people were hit and stopped moving. Class 3, get ready. Wu Sheng issued one order after another. The number of black-clothed men was reduced one by one. Originally, there were at least 100 people in the group, but after a round of roll call, not even half of the 50 people were left alive. Qi Lu was quite lucky, because he had been lying on the ground and did not dare to move. No one hit him in this round of roll call. However, when he clearly felt his brothers dying one by one, cold sweat flowed down his neck. These people were not afraid of death. They had been living a life of blood on the edge of a blade. However, they were not afraid of death, and they would not die if they did not replace them, especially when they did not even see the shadow of their opponents and died without knowing why. This was something that no one wanted. Now that he was in the situation, he finally understood how powerful these advanced firearms were. At this moment, he regretted his reckless actions. Suddenly, Qi Lu gritted his teeth and shouted, "Brothers, don't be afraid. The weapons in their hands are only useful from a distance. When we get closer, it will be our world. Now listen to me. Everyone, stand up and charge together. We will kill our way through. We will wash the Yang family village with blood." Perhaps Qi Lu's shout had an effect, or perhaps everyone knew that waiting like this would only lead to death. At this moment, such a shout actually caused everyone who was still alive to stand up. Then, after a shout, they all rushed forward together. In the inner courtyard of the Yang family village, Hu Yan and the other girls heard the gunshots not far away from them. They also heard the rumbling sounds of artillery fire from even further away. Their faces were all filled with anxiety. Around them, not only did the second security team, Dao Xiao, and the others stay, but also the academy's students, Tai Qingyi and Jiang Ping. They were dressed in black and had long swords at their waists. They looked like they were ready to fight at any time in the face of danger. It was because of their existence that the inner courtyard was not disturbed by the outside world and became extremely safe. However, this could not eliminate the anxiety in Hu Yan and the other girls. After all, they were girls. War and blood seemed to be very distant things to them. Now that it really happened in front of them, they could not be blamed for acting in all kinds of ways. As the legal wife, Hu Yan knew when to show her responsible side. She mustered up the courage to comfort the girls. "It's okay. Lu Lang has already said that the sound of artillery and gunshots is normal. Besides, there are mercenaries outside. No one can enter the village. Everyone, don't worry." However, at the same time, Hu Yan also blamed herself. This time, it was actually because of them. If it were not for wanting to save more women, there would not be a conflict with the Black Water Gang, and this would not have happened. In the end, it was their kindness that brought trouble to their husband. Not only Hu Yan, but the other girls also thought so. They even began to consider whether they should seriously consider what they were going to do in the future. Chapter 310. In a courtyard not far from the main courtyard, Junko and Kobayashi were also looking up at the distant fire in the capital. Under the night sky, it seemed that the place had become red. "Kobayashi, you once stayed with Imperial Father for a period of time and heard some teachers talk about the power of cannons. In your opinion, is what they said credible?" Junko's face was very calm, but only she knew how excited and even a little scared she was at this moment. "No, I've heard that the great Ming dynasty has cannons, but I heard that it's just a line. How could it cause such a big movement?" Kobayashi shook his head, his face full of shock. It could be seen that at this moment, he was more or less scared. "What a pity." Junko shook her head helplessly. "It's a pity that he didn't let us go to the scene in person. We can only wait for the other students to come back and inquire about it. But in the end, we heard it from others, so it's not that real. Yang Chendong didn't allow the girls to go to the scene to observe, which naturally made Junko dissatisfied. But she also knew that since it was his order, there was no reason to not carry it out. He had always been a man of his word, and this was one of the deepest impressions Yang Chendong left on Junko. The people in the manor were guessing the situation outside, and just a few hundred meters away from them, at the entrance of the manor, the two sides were confronting each other. Qi Lu instigated everyone, wanting to use the human wave tactic to fight. But the result was obvious. After a burst of gunfire, there were less than 5 people left standing on the battlefield, and Master Qi Lu was one of them. He was worthy of being the third brother of the Blackwater gang, and his ability to protect himself on the battlefield was not bad. Just like just now, he always tried to hide behind others on the way, so that the people in front of him fell one by one, and he was the last one to stand. The reason why he was able to stand until now was not because the Cold Front's marksmanship was not good, or because they lost their aim, but because Wu Sheng gave the order to stop shooting. Yang Chendong had said more than once that if you have a gun, don't use a knife, and if you can kill from a distance, don't fight in close range. However, when there were only 5 opponents left, Wu Sheng still decided to use close combat to win. He knew that Yang Wu was injured, and he recognized that one of the 5 people was the one who had injured Yang Wu. Since that was the case, it was time for an eye for an eye. Since they dared to hurt the people around the young master, it would not be easy even if they wanted to die. You are Qi Lu. He placed the Type 95 class machine gun in the hands of a lung foam. Wu Sheng said as he walked towards the center of the battlefield with a tri-edge army knife in his hand. I am Third Master Qi. Who are you? Seeing that the other party was no longer shooting and was about to engage in close combat, a glimmer of hope appeared in his lifeless eyes. He was even considering if he could take the person down and use him as a hostage. Even if he couldn't kill his way into the Yang village, he could at least leave safely. What are you thinking? Are you thinking of taking me as a hostage? Wu Sheng chuckled when he saw that Qi Lu's eyes were rolling nonstop. Then, he pointed out the other party's thoughts with a single sentence. Huh. Suddenly being pointed out, Qi Lu's expression changed. When he noticed that the other party was less than 5 steps away from him, he suddenly shouted and then slashed forward with the ghost head blade in his hand. This style of Qi Lu's was wide open, so that he could get close to the opponent. Only then could he get close to the opponent and make the gunman hesitate and not dare to shoot. Regarding Qi Lu's sudden approach, Wu Sheng was not surprised at all. On the contrary, he was a little excited. The tri-edge army knife in his hand was a godly weapon for close combat. If the distance was too far, it would not be of much use. His opponent's actions were exactly what Wu Sheng wanted. However, he didn't show any signs of excitement. On the contrary, when the ghost head blade approached him, his feet began to continuously retreat, giving off the feeling that he didn't want to engage in close combat. However, his body retreated and did not advance as quickly. In just 2 breaths, the distance between the two was instantly shortened. The original distance of 5 steps became less than 3 steps. As the 2 sides got closer, Qi Lu's eyes flashed with excitement. He seemed to have seen the hope of survival. Then, just as the excitement flashed, the figure in front of him, who was constantly retreating, suddenly stopped. Not only that, but the figure actually moved forward. The sudden change greatly exceeded Qi Lu's expectations. His instincts told him that he was in danger. The ghost head blade in his hand instinctively shrunk back. However, Wu Sheng's movements were simply too fast. In addition to the fact that he did the opposite, Qi Lu felt a sharp pain in his abdomen. Following that, It was as if all the strength in his body had been sucked out in an instant. He couldn't even pull back his saber. He could only watch helplessly as the heavy saber fell from his hand and fell to the ground. That feeling of weakness continued to hit him. His body continuously moved, and with a plop, Qi Lu fell to the ground. The moment he fell to the ground, he saw that there was a bloody hole in his waist. Blood was gushing out like a fountain, and it couldn't be stopped. Just a moment ago, Wu Sheng first acted weak, indicating that he did not want to let the opponent get close to him. Then, he suddenly retreated in order to advance. Following that, the tri-edge army knife in his hand pierced his waist with lightning speed, causing him a heavy injury. There was no need to mention the might of the tri-edge army knife. After a successful strike, no opponent could withstand it. Qi Lu was the same. Looking at the bloody hole in his body, he knew that he would not be able to survive. This was the result of his carelessness. Qi Lu finally understood that the people in front of him were not only powerful long-range firearms, they were also skilled in close combat. This time, he did not die in vain. At the same time that Qi Lu fell, a few other Cold Vanguard squad leaders rushed out from the group. Each of them held a tri-edge army knife and rushed towards the 4 lucky people in black standing in the middle of the field. This was a very good opportunity for close combat. Obviously, no one wanted to miss it. It was precisely because everyone had such thoughts that the 4 black-clothed men each faced opponents that were twice or even 3 times their number. Their courage had already been shattered, and they could not even use half of their usual strength. Facing such an elite Lung Feng, the result was obvious. After just a dozen breaths, not a single black-clothed man was able to stand unscathed. Clean up the battlefield. Also, ask 5th brother to come out. Wu Sheng said with a red face after injuring Qi Lu in one move. As for Qi Lu, who was still bleeding on the ground, he wasn't dead yet, but the feeling was far more terrifying than death. He finally understood why the other party didn't use the gun to finish him off. It turned out that the other party wanted to torture him, to watch him slowly die from excessive blood loss. The scene of flames soaring into the sky was not only seen by the people in Yangjia village. Even Wu Yong, who was leading people to ambush the Duke of Loyalty, saw it. After determining the direction, Wu Yong's heart sank when he confirmed that the source of the flames was Blackwell Street. He had calculated everything, but he did not think that the Duke of Loyalty would have such powerful cannons. Moreover, they had ignored the fact that Blackwell Street was located in the capital and fired without hesitation. Compared to other people, Wu Yong's thoughts were more meticulous. This allowed him to understand Yang Chendong's past even more clearly. It was because of this that he knew how this person had intimidated the Walla's leader, Yes Hen, and made him withdraw his troops and return more than 70,000 captives. This was the first time the words cannons had appeared in his mind. It also made him wonder if the Duke of Loyalty would use cannons to attack Blackwell Street. However, this thought only flashed through his mind for a moment, not for anything else. Because Blackwell Street was located in the capital, no matter how bold the Duke of Loyalty was, he would not dare to use such powerful cannons. On this point, Shi Tao, who had been sent by Ming, confirmed that the great Ming dynasty did not find any cannons left behind by the mercenaries. Seeing all these signs, Wu Yong was finally relieved. He waited here with peace of mind, waiting for the rabbit to appear. But he never thought that the cannons would really appear. Thinking that even Yes Hen was so afraid, Blackwell Street would have been in a sea of fire. Praying that his elder brother, Hu Huaihai, would be fine, Wu Yong was even more determined to wait here for Yang Chendong. Not for anything else, this person was so bold to use the cannons. He was probably proud of himself now. In this way, the defense would be relaxed, and it would be a good time for him to attack. Wu Yong even thought that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and he had to seize it. But he did not know that compared to playing tactics, Yang Chendong, who had lived for hundreds of years in the future, had seen and heard far more than him. Just like now, when Wu Yong was ambushing Yang Chendong 5 miles outside the city gate, Tai Hu of the Langya Special Forces was also leading his team members here. Since he had decided to attack the Black Water Gang, of course, he had to be more careful and more prepared. Therefore, Yang Chendong had been thinking about what preparations he would make if he was the opponent. Obviously, he couldn't forget to ambush them halfway. Thus, he left this matter to Tai Hu. Even in the cold front, Tai Hu was an elite existence. Tai Hu, who had accepted the task, first began to search the city. After all, from the Yongding Gate to Black Well Street, one had to pass through many streets. If it was an assassin, hiding there was obviously the safest and most hidden. With this thought in mind, Tai Hu began to search after Yang Chendong entered the city. Unfortunately, he did not find anything. Even when he reached the city gate, he still did not see any danger. Chapter 3:11. If it was someone else, they would consider canceling the operation. But Tai, who had always been a serious person, since the young master said that there might be an ambush on the way back, how could he be careless? He immediately led a group of people out of the city and continued to investigate in the direction of Yangjia village. Under his perseverance, Iron Tiger and Wu Yong finally met. The first to discover was the hidden scout sent by Wu Yong. Although the other party had hidden very well, but in the eyes of Langya, this kind of concealment technique was child's play. But the scout that was sent out did have some ability. He actually let out a cry before he died. In the dark night, the sudden cry finally attracted Wu Yong's attention. Instinctively, he felt that something was wrong and ran away. Before some of his brothers could react, Tai Hu and his men appeared like divine soldiers descending from the sky. Then, a series of gunshots rang out. Although the people who stayed here to ambush were skilled, but facing the equally skilled Langya, who had better weapons and equipment, it seemed that they would be at a disadvantage. The tri-edge army knife could not only cause a wound that was difficult to heal, but it was also powerful because of the hardness of its material. When the user was strong enough, and the battle between the two sides started with an explosive battle, it could easily break ordinary weapons like swords, spears, swords, halberds, and so on. Imagine, after a confrontation, one side's weapon broke into two. What kind of consequences would that cause? Wu Yong's advantage in terms of weapons and his sudden appearance caught the other party off guard. Even though there were quite a number of world of martial arts experts in Wu Yong's group and their attacks were ruthless, they still began to suffer casualties after a few exchanges. Screams could be heard, and from those screams, Wu Yong could roughly distinguish who was injured, fell into a trap, and suffered losses. As for someone finding him, to be honest, Wu Yong had thought about this before, but it was just a fleeting thought in his mind. He had investigated Yang Chendong. Although this person's methods were powerful, but he also had a big shortcoming, and that was that there were too few people he could use. Although this time the Supreme Court and the soldiers of the 5 cities military office would assist him, but what could they do to the Black Well General? What could they do to the Black Water Gang? That would truly be a joke. At the end of the day, if they were to really fight, the most mysterious mercenary group would probably be the ones to lead the Duke of Loyalty. Since that was the case, excluding the people in the manor who were attacking and defending, there should not be many people left. How could they be a threat to him? It was precisely because he had underestimated them that he felt helpless when facing the sudden appearance of the wolf fangs. But no matter what, Wu Yong was able to become the sect's second in command and was given the title of military advisor. His mind was still very quick. Let's go. Without the slightest hesitation, after Wu Yong shouted this sentence, he had already brought a few of his trusted aides and quickly retreated. That kind of decisiveness made it seem as if he did not hear the screams of his brothers behind him from time to time. At this moment, what they had said when they were together, they would share blessings and hardships together, was so laughable and childish. Since it was an ambush, once it was discovered, the meaning would naturally change. Since there was no chance left, what were they waiting for? Wu Yong left, but he only brought 4 or 5 of his brothers with him. Without the slightest hesitation, Tai Hu lost track of the other party after killing 4 of the bandits. Looking at the empty ambush ground, all he could do was to sigh and say, "You guys ran fast." He ended this round of slaughter. It was not accurate to say that it was a slaughter, because in this battle, 4 of the Wolf Fang's brothers were actually injured. One of the injuries was quite serious. Although it was not life-threatening, he would not be able to get out of bed for at least a month. This result naturally caused the captain, Tai Hu, to be dissatisfied. However, he also knew that although the Wolf Fangs were the elites of the elites, the strength of the opponents this time was not weak. Moreover, the number of people was several times their own. In addition, they had more training than actual combat, so the opportunity to face off with a blade like this was still too little. But fortunately, as long as no one died after experiencing today's events, presumably once they recovered and returned, their strength should be on another level. The Wolf Fangs were unprepared, but still suffered some injuries. It was conceivable that if they suddenly appeared, it might really threaten Yang Chendong's life. Speaking of Yang Chendong, at this moment, he was standing on Heijing Street, commanding the bailiffs, constables, and soldiers of the 5 cities' warden office to clean up the battlefield. They originally thought that this would be a bloody battle. Whether it was the Supreme Court or the 5 cities' warden office, the soldiers who participated in this operation were all nervous. Although they knew that the leader this time was the military god, when they thought of the various deeds of the Blackwater Gang, it was impossible to say that they were not at all afraid in their hearts. As a martial artist, fame was originally obtained by risking one's life. If one wanted to climb up, it was impossible to not pay a price and even not take risks. Therefore, some people who thought that they had some skills thought that this might be a good opportunity for them to perform. No matter what kind of mentality they had, what they did not expect was that in the end, Yang Chendong would use this method to solve the problem. The roar of the cannons shook the sky, and the entire Heijing Street fell into a vast sea of fire. It was a completely one-sided attack. What originally seemed to be a very difficult thing was done so easily, which shocked everyone and made them speechless. This was an open scheme. It was an open and above-board method of attack. In this way, the problem was solved and the bystanders had nothing to say. Not only were the bystanders speechless, even the students of the Yang Academy who came to observe this time were dumbfounded at this moment, and their jaws dropped in shock. Before the fight started, some of the students wanted to show off their martial arts skills and test their skills in martial arts that they had learned during this period of time in the academy. The headmaster said that practice was the only standard to test the truth. They were looking forward to a good test. Although they were excited, they were also a little nervous. For example, they knew about the chaos in Heijing Street and that the Blackwater Gang was made up of desperados. Once they fought, there was a possibility of injury or even death at any time. However, out of trust in the headmaster, Yang Chendong asked them to come, so he should be prepared. But they never thought that it would be such a preparation. They were simply here to watch a show, and there was no chance for them to do anything. It was not accurate to say that they were here to watch a show. Just as the soldiers of the Supreme Court and the 5 cities' military office began to clean up the battlefield after the bombardment, they also moved. This was also the headmaster's order. He gave each of them a sharp knife, and asked them to go in and see if there was anyone who was not completely dead. When the time came, they just needed to finish the job. As for the people who could live here, Yang Qindong had no mercy at all. Killing was killing. There was no need for a trial at all. Every student was followed by one of Lung Feng's brothers. This was also a way to ensure that nothing would go wrong. These people had been learning from him for a few months, and they were all outstanding people in all aspects. It would be a pity if they were killed like this. With the canons that were so many years ahead of this era, there were too few people who could survive. Of course, there were a few lucky ones. Because they were standing in different positions at the time, they were not immediately killed by the cannons, but they were basically seriously injured. When the cleaning up battle began, these so-called lucky ones could announce the end of their lives. The cleaning of the battlefield was very fast. The sky had just brightened, and in just 2 hours, everything was over. They also found a few secret passages, and in one of them, they found the body of the Black Water Gang's boss, Hu Huaihai. Even when this person died, his eyes were not closed. Instead, his eyes were wide open like copper bells, as if expressing the shock and indignation in his heart. With Hu Huaihai dead, the Black Water Gang was like a dragon without a leader. In a way, it could be said that the Black Water Gang was completely destroyed. Next, there were some small fries who were lucky enough to survive, but it would be difficult for them to cause any trouble. At this point, this battle could be said to have reached a perfect conclusion. The only fly in the ointment was that Wu Yong ran away. Just a moment ago, 2 pieces of information from the Intelligence Bureau were sent over. One was that Qi Lu brought people to attack the Yang village, but failed. They were completely wiped out by Wu Sheng, who was waiting for him there. The other was about Wolf's Fong. According to the previous arrangement, they searched all the way and really found the ambushers. They killed most of them, but the second in command, Wu Yong, who was known as the Star of Wisdom, ran away. There was a fish that escaped the net. Yang Qindong finally felt a trace of imperfection. But considering that the Black Water Gang on Blackwell Street had been destroyed, it was not a big deal that one person escaped. While ordering the Security Bureau to continue to track the whereabouts of this person, he turned his gaze to other directions. This time, he used the mysterious cannons to cleanly solve the problem of the Black Water Gang. It was satisfying, and presumably, it would also frighten some people. Next, they would definitely have some reaction, but he did not know what they would do. In the throne room, the court meeting was going on as scheduled. Compared to the past, many of the officials' expressions were slightly more serious. Last night, the rumbling sound of the cannons was like an earth dragon turning over, and no one could ignore it. In the morning, many of the courtiers found out what had happened. Some of the bolder courtiers even took a detour to Blackwell Street. What they saw was a messy and chaotic scene. Yesterday, it was still a strategically advantageous situation, but today, it had become a scorched earth. Occasionally, some places were still smoking after the fire. This scene was deeply imprinted in their minds, making them feel the horror of the Duke of Loyalty again. Chapter 3:12. Influenced by Confucianism, the Ming dynasty emphasized that the scholar officials and the emperor ruled the world together. Therefore, it is inconceivable now that the position of the scholar is so high. The status of scholars was very high, so there were even more people who flocked to them. Talents emerged in an endless stream, and there was a situation where one person appeared after another. It was precisely because of this that no one could stand high and mighty forever, and no one could fight against everyone with their own strength. But now, there was a Duke of Loyalty. He could make clouds and rain with a flip of his hand, and he did not put everyone in his eyes. He paid attention to doing things his own way, and he was supported by powerful financial resources and military force. his existence naturally became an alternative, a force that opposed Confucianism and the imperial power. Yang Qindong alone occupied one side of the three-legged tripod. This kind of oppression made many people feel very uncomfortable. Everyone had always paid attention to the fact that they were all high and mighty, but they were all controlled by others. Only in this way could there be a balance, and everyone could live a good life. And if anyone violated the rules of the game, even the current emperor could be overthrown. At worst, they could find a suitable and obedient person who knew when to advance and retreat to be a substitute. It was like Zhu Qijin had an accident, and Zhu Qiyu had quickly replaced him. Even the emperor could be replaced. This was where the scholar officials' confidence came from. This was also the reason why civil officials were higher than military officials. However, the appearance of Yang Qindong broke all these rules. It could be imagined how many people were dissatisfied and voicing their opinions. It happened so suddenly that no one showed it in today's court meeting. Everyone seemed to be thinking about how to unite to suppress this new Duke of Loyalty after going back. But before these people could do anything, the military commander-in-chief among the officials, Marquis Wukinghao Shiheng, suddenly walked out of the crowd and said loudly, "Your Majesty, the new army has been recruited and arranged into an army in order to increase their combat strength. This subject suggests that they be swapped with the soldiers of the Datong Manor, Kaiping Guard, and Guangping Guard. This way, they will be able to show their loyalty to the emperor by guarding the borders. At the same time, they can also be trained to become qualified soldiers in the shortest amount of time." I second that. Ming, the Minister of War, stood out and echoed Shiheng's words. The sudden words of the two second-rank officials, one civil and one military, immediately caused the officials to whisper to each other. As long as one wasn't a fool, anyone could see that this had been planned long ago and had even been tacitly approved by the emperor. When they thought about what had happened in the early hours of the morning, everyone was suddenly enlightened. The so-called changing of the guard, transferring the army guarding the border to the capital, was probably the emperor's counterattack against the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. As foreign soldiers, they were naturally much more obedient than the native soldiers of the capital. Their lack of roots made them even more loyal to the emperor and easier to use. Of course, the important thing was that they were rather unfamiliar with the name of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. They were far less inclined to believe in the Duke of Loyalty and Courage than the able-bodied men of the capital. If they were replaced with soldiers, the war god's influence in the army would be greatly reduced. In this way, the emperor would have a much better chance of success if he wanted to make a move. Some of the officials couldn't help but shift their expressions. Was the emperor really planning to move against the Duke of Loyalty and Courage? If this had happened a few days ago, even if Zhu Qiyu had wanted to move against Yang Qindong, some of the officials would have tried to persuade him against it. After all, the Duke of Loyalty and Courage was a meritorious subject, and he could not be lightly moved without a good reason. At the same time, this was also for himself. Once he made a great contribution, what use would there be for others to move against him? But what had just happened showed just how frightening Yang Qindong was. In the face of such a subject, there was no master who would not feel threatened. Thus, it would not be excessive to think of ways to strike and even eradicate him. In the crowd, even the Minister of Rights, Hu Chang, and the Minister of Personnel, Wang Zhi, had furrowed their brows for a moment, but they quickly regained their calm and composed expressions. It was true that Yang Qindong's actions had shocked everyone, and it was also true that even the emperor had been shaken. But the two of them did not believe that they would move against this person right now. It was said that the bow should be put away after the birds had flown, but the problem was that this was not the time yet. Whether it was Zhu Qijin's regime in the south or the Walla in the north, they had not yet been dealt with. If they moved against Yang Qindong now, no one knew what kind of ripple it would cause. No matter how dissatisfied Zhu Qiyu was, he did not dare to move recklessly at this moment, for no other reason than the fact that he could not bear the consequences. Without Yang Qindong, the insect in the south could attack at any time, and there would be no buffer between the brothers. Without Yang Qindong, the wallow in the north could attack once more, and his current strength would not be enough to stop them. Just these two conditions alone were enough. Zhu Qiyu probably also saw this point, so he only made adjustments to the troops. This was also a disguised warning to Yang Qindong that he should not go too far. Otherwise, the Ming army, which had no influence on him, could attack him. Although both sides might suffer losses, no one would be willing to bear such an outcome. Speaking of which, this was just a way to check and balance each other. Since the emperor had done this, it proved that he had no intention of falling out with him, and there would not be any danger. Hu Chang was Hu Yan's grandfather, and now that he had a marriage alliance with the Yang family, if something happened, he would not be able to escape responsibility. Wang Zhi was Wang Xi's grandfather, and his favorite grandson was studying in the Yang Qindong Academy. He had become one of Yang Qindong's students, and it was said that he was a very important student. In this way, with the title of master and disciple, many benefits were naturally tied together. The tie between benefits and family made it impossible for the two ministers to ignore everything that had happened. They even wondered if they should persuade Yang Qindong to keep a low profile. Of course, the most important thing was, what did the youngest and most daring Duke of Loyalty want to do? What did he want? In the court, with the advice of a governor and a minister and the emperor's permission, the matter of transferring troops was quickly settled. Next, it would probably be to use money and manpower to do things. It seemed that the way of war was an important matter for the country, but because of the bombardment on Blackwell Street last night, it seemed that everyone was unable to concentrate, so no one really took the matter of the Ministry of War to heart. Of course, it was not that they did not take it to heart, but that they could not concentrate. But there were still some people who thought too much, such as Hu Chang, Wang Zhi, and the newly appointed left assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Su Yozhen. Nothing that happened in the court could be kept a secret. Often, when the higher-ups just made a policy, the people below would soon know about it. Perhaps this was one of the characteristics of the court. Yang Qindong learned about this matter not long after the morning court. At this moment, he was standing at the place where Wu Yong had ambushed him. The captain of Langia, Tai Hu, was very sensible. He even caught two people alive. He managed to pry Wu Yong's name and identity out of their mouths. Wu Yong, Shuebu Liangshan. When he heard this name, Yang Qindong's face flashed with an indifferent smile. Then he threw this name aside, arranged for the Security Bureau to do their best to investigate this person and arrest him. After saying this, Yang Qindong returned to the luxurious and comfortable carriage. As soon as he got into the carriage, he closed his eyes and rested. He did not sleep last night. This way of closing his eyes was just another way of resting. In his previous life, in order to complete a task, it was normal for him to not sleep for several days and nights. But closing his eyes now was just a kind of nap. In truth, he was thinking more about the matter of changing the guard. He had defeated Walla, become the war god, and rescued 70,000 captives. Yang Qindong held an extremely important position in the hearts of the Ming army. This could be seen from the fact that every time Yang Qindong entered the city, any soldier who saw him would stand at a distance and bow. It was precisely because of this that the matter of changing the guard had occurred. Shi Heng had even intentionally captured many able-bodied men from the capital, breaking up many families for this purpose. At the time, Yang Qindong had wondered if there was a need to do all this just to gather enough soldiers. But now he completely understood that this was not because there were not enough soldiers. It was clearly to weaken his influence and even divert the disaster away from him. After all, he was a near-legendary existence in the capital, and the immortal abode had the daily spectacle of the war god defeating Walla. With word of mouth spreading the news, it was not a problem for everyone to know about this matter. It was precisely because his influence in the capital was so great that this matter of forcefully recruiting soldiers had occurred. Don't you all worship the war god? Very good. Then I'll capture all of you and send you to the border. Let's see how your war god will save you. This was a method of removing the firewood from under the cauldron. By doing this, not only would it weaken Yang Qindong's influence in the capital, if someone were to guide him, they would even blame this terrible situation on Yang Qindong. One could even say that if not for this person, no one would have been forced to join the army, and they would not have had to leave the capital. If Yang Qindong's predictions were correct, this sort of manipulation of public opinion would be detrimental to him. If he didn't even have this sort of method, neither Shiheng nor Ming would be able to gain the emperor's favor. But these were just minor tricks, putting aside the fact that they might not be able to affect Yang Qindong. This method was wrong in the first place. From start to finish, his goal had not been to expand his influence from the capital, but to encircle the cities from the countryside. Chapter 3:13. It was the countryside surrounding the city. Yang Qindong's intention was to establish himself in the capital and make a name for himself. Then he would establish enough deterrence so that no one would dare to look down on him and make trouble for him. It seemed that he had done enough of these things. Whether it was defeating the Walla army, beating up the Japanese envoy, or bombarding Haging Street, no one would dare to try anything behind his back. Since it was stable, then what he had done was more or less done. If he were a little more forceful, he would have to confront the imperial power, and the consequences would be unpredictable. At the very least, Yang Qindong, who lacked military power and influence, had not thought about what to do in the capital. In the society of the time, news spread very slowly. The Ming dynasty was still very powerful, and the imperial power still had a deep influence. Changing all of this was not something that could be done in a single day. It was said that heroes were born in troubled times. In the face of the great Ming dynasty, which was not in chaos, many people would find it difficult to do much even if they had all the strength in their bodies. Logically speaking, Yang Qindong could have become a wealthy man in a peaceful world. With his ability and influence, he was completely capable of doing this. After all, no one could hold such an important position in the hearts of both Zhu Qiyu and Qi Zhen. But since he had come to this world and knew what would happen in the future, Yang Qindong did not want to see his descendants being bullied and trampled on by foreigners. He wanted the health of his descendants, the moment when the Han people reached the apex of the world. With such a grand dream, how difficult would it be to put it into practice in the future? Even if one was rich enough to rival an entire country, it would still be impossible to achieve this goal. With the development of communications and the binding of interests, every action of any country was equivalent to living under a magnifying glass. If any country wanted to do something out of line, they would become the enemy of the world. Any country that was too strong could be labeled as a hegemon. But this was not the case now. With the lack of information, there were even cases where people did not know of each other's existence. Even if they did know, it was very difficult to understand the situation, and it could be called a complete darkness. At this moment, if a force or country suddenly rose up, it would be very difficult for others to join forces to resist. This was an opportunity. With these thoughts in mind, Yang Qindong boarded the carriage and returned to the Yang Manor. The task of cleaning up Black Well Street was handed over to Sun Pa, one of the commanders of the warden's office of the 5 cities, and Wang Bo, the deputy of the Supreme Court. There should not be any problems. The next step was to calculate the results of the battle, and then how to make the data look better. Anyone with a little brain would know what to do. For Yang Chendong, this operation was more of a deterrent, a timely show of the tiger's fangs to warn some people. As for how Zhu Qiyu, who had begun to counterattack because of this matter, would change the defense, he would just treat it as a big show to watch. In any case, no matter who it was, he believed that they wouldn't touch him unless they had absolute confidence. Of course, he did it on purpose this time. He wanted to find an excuse for himself and for Zhu Qiyu. He believed that when the right time came, he would be able to grasp it. Before the opportunity appeared, Yang Chendong still focused on the Yang Academy. If everything went well, he would probably leave the capital for a period of time. Before that, how to train the first batch of students was a must. Just like a tiger patrolling the mountains, Yang Chendong returned to the Yang family manor after showing off his prowess. From all kinds of information, it seemed that he was once again the head of the academy with only a few dozen students. When this news spread, many of the important officials were puzzled. Among the officials of the great Ming dynasty, Yang Chendong was definitely an exception and a different existence. Only the Confucian school was respected, so the status of scholars and learned people was far higher than the other common people, merchants, craftsmen, and soldiers. Under the policy of using literature to suppress force, the status of scholars in society was even higher. They seemed to be able to casually point out the country and make judgments about the affairs of the world. Coupled with the fact that they were from the same sect, it was easier for them to band together. This led to the situation where the scholar officials and the emperor ruled the world. Yang Chendong was the descendant of Yang Rong, the son of the three Yangs. Even if he didn't know anything with his status, he wouldn't have a bad life. As long as he had a little ability, he would be able to sit high in the imperial court. It was even possible for him to repeat the past glory of the Yang clan. This was the so-called good birth. However, Yang Chendong had a good birth and was extremely capable. He had even made great contributions and was greatly indebted to both the northern and southern emperors of the great Ming dynasty. If such a person were to sit high in the imperial court, he would be a symbol of a boundless future. Once he had enough experience, it was not impossible for him to become an important official or even a powerful official. It could be said that his future was bright, but he showed that he was uninterested in the imperial court. All he cared about every day was doing business and teaching students. He didn't teach orthodox Confucianism, nor did he teach the Analects of Confucius, the 4 books, or the 5 classics. Instead, he included magic, chemistry, physics, geography, and other things that were called unorthodox at that time. Under the rule of Confucianism, the status of merchants was very low. Even if you were rich, even very rich, if you didn't have enough background, everything you had would become a gift to others. This was the reason why many famous merchants would still be very respectful when facing aristocratic families who were far less wealthy than them. However, it was this business that wasn't recognized by mainstream society that Yang Chendong was willing to dive into and play with. Doing business, teaching unorthodox methods, all these actions really gave people a feeling of not doing proper work. This was what made the important officials and even the acting sect master, Zhu Qiyu, unable to understand. Sometimes, the emperor who had stolen his brother's throne couldn't help but wonder what the Duke of Loyalty and Courage that he had bestowed upon him actually wanted. Was he really uninterested in the imperial court? If that was the case, wasn't his targeting a little too excessive? Wasn't he being too sensitive? If even the emperor was thinking this, the other officials were even less able to understand. As the one being suspected, Yang Chendong didn't seem to care about what others thought. After returning to the academy, he became a serious and solemn teacher, diligently teaching his students. His 4 wives and concubines continued to enter the capital that morning, those who were practicing in the immortal abode, and those who were taking in the women on the streets were still doing so. It was as if they were completely unaffected by the bombardment, as if the incident at Black Well Street had never happened. It was precisely this seemingly ordinary behavior that left everyone scratching their heads in confusion. After thinking about it for a while, everyone turned their attention back to their own matters. Although the bombardment in the middle of the night was still there, it was only aimed at Black Well Street. Since it didn't have anything to do with them, they naturally went back to what they were doing. Only a few people with deep foresight could vaguely see that this young Duke of Great Ming's loyal and courageous actions were all practical matters. Developing commerce was accumulating money, Yang Bao was controlling public opinion, the immortal abode was expanding its influence, the Yang Clan's bank was hoarding money, and even the Yang Clan's academy was teaching pragmatism. It was just that the majority of people couldn't see it clearly. But regardless, the storm gradually calmed down. Some of the officials who had thought that something major was about to happen breathed a sigh of relief. More attention was placed on the matter of changing the guard of the army. When it came to the mobilization of hundreds of thousands of troops, there were a lot of things that needed to be done, a lot of money needed to be spent, and there were also a lot of empty seats. How to curry favor with them and get what they wanted was what the officials should consider and do. With Zhu Qiyu's approval and powerful officials like Shi Heng and Ming taking charge, the matter of changing the guard of the army began to unfold with great vigor. Squad after squad of soldiers walked out of the capital, and squad after squad of soldiers entered the capital in an orderly fashion. This display of the Great Ming's military strength allowed even more officials and nobles to relax and enjoy their lives. But in the wake of all this, countless families had been destroyed, and countless people had been lost. The officials turned their attention away from Yang Qindong, but there were still some people who paid attention to this person. In an unremarkable Chengshan Inn in the capital, in the dimly lit backyard, a tall man was standing there, listening to a man whose eyes occasionally flashed with killing intent. Big Brother Yen, my big brother and third brother died too, unjustly this time. You have to uphold justice for us. The shorter man, who was dressed like a wanderer of the Jianghu, had said many things before concluding with these words. He seemed to be weeping about something. Unjustly, the person who was addressed as Big Brother Yen uttered one word. It was unknown whether he was sighing or speaking from his emotions. He shook his head lightly and continued, You 2 brothers went up against the Duke of Loyalty and Courage of the Great Ming Dynasty, who is also known as the God of War. Since you did it, you should have expected such an ending. Yes, we were careless in this matter, but no matter what, he shouldn't have been so ruthless. It's a pity that my elder brother was killed by the bombardment in the secret passage, and my third brother was killed by a flintlock. If I don't do something, I won't have the face to see my brothers after I die. The scholar continued to speak. He didn't seem to want to give up. At this point, everyone should know that this scholar was the second master of the Blackwater gang, Wu Yong, who was also known as the military advisor. He also thought that this operation would be too challenging, so he made 3 preparations. However, he never expected that the other party had no intention of tangling with him at all. Instead, the other party used an advanced firearm and ended everything with a single push. Chapter 314. Yesterday at this time, the 3 brothers were still drinking and eating meat together, imagining the beautiful future after this deal was completed. But today, he was the only one left alive. How could he be satisfied? As for the brother standing in front of him, his name was Yen Tao. He had always had a good relationship with the boss of the Blackwater gang, Hu Huaihai. It was said that boss who had saved his life before. Now, this person had an identity that could not be ignored. He was the chief arrestor of the Ministry of Justice. The arrestor was the so-called criminal police of the Public Security Bureau. Usually, such a person was not only good at fighting, but also very smart. And to be able to stand out in this team and become the chief arrestor, it could be seen how good his fighting skills and wisdom were. Even in this environment where officials and nobles gathered in the capital, the identity of the chief arrestor of the Ministry of Justice was also well known and could not be ignored. It was precisely because of his power that Wu Yong found Yen Tao after escaping from the attack of the Wolf's Fang to avenge his brothers. Of course, this time his opponent was Yang Qindong. Wu Yong knew that it was not realistic to only rely on the previous kindness to persuade him. So when he asked Yen Tao to come out, he also made another preparation, which was to give him a big gift. In this world, living was nothing more than living for nothing more than a mouth. Under this condition, how to live a better life, more face, and more status would become a higher level of pursuit. People like Yen Tao naturally had face, and even some power. But because of the importance of his position, there were many people who had their eyes on him. There were not many ways to live a more luxurious life in terms of money. Wu Yong saw this point, and this time he used it as a breakthrough point. Seeing that Yen Tao did not agree to avenge his elder brother and third brother, he gritted his teeth and said, "Big brother, Yen, as long as you can avenge my elder brother and younger brother, the Blackwater Gang is willing to give you all the benefits that we have accumulated over the years." Hearing the benefits, Yen Tao seemed to be confused, but the fast twitching of the corner of his eyes was still noticed by the clever Wu Yong. "That's right. It's the gold and silver that we've plundered over the years. Adding it all together, it's about 800,000 taels. As long as we can take revenge, all of this will belong to brother Yen." 800,000 taels was undoubtedly a huge sum of money. Although Yen Tao was one of the chief constables of the Ministry of Justice, and people often gave him gifts, it was still a lot less than this amount. No one would be moved by it. On the other side, Wu Yong had already used his trump card. Naturally, he wouldn't stop there. He continued to say, "Big brother Yen, although the matter between you and our Blackwater Gang is secretive, it's not like we don't have any clues. If you really want to find it, it's possible. With that loyal and courageous Duke's character, he must have found out about our previous relationship. Would he spare me? But with these 800,000 taels of silver, it will be different. You can no longer be a constable. You can go far away at any time and find a place where no one knows you to be a rich man. Wouldn't that be great?" On one hand, there were threats, and on the other hand, there were benefits. It was a game of steamed buns and sticks, and in Yen Tao's ears, there was no doubt that there were bolts of thunder. Even if he wanted to peacefully deal with the matter in front of him, he probably couldn't. After an unknown amount of time, perhaps it was very fast, perhaps it was the time to brew a cup of tea, or perhaps it was an hour, he finally heard the sound of a long exhalation. Obviously, he had already made a decision. "This matter is troublesome. You can stay here first. Don't worry. This is one of the strongholds under my jurisdiction. No one will find this place." Yen Tao agreed. Wu Yong's face was immediately filled with joy as he said, "I'll listen to Big Brother Yen. I'll stay here." Wu Yong was confident that Yen Tao wouldn't do anything to him. He didn't see any benefits, nor did he see any other brothers. Who knew if he had left any backup plans outside? Once something happened, his relationship with the Blackwater Gang would be exposed to the world. Relying on this, Yen Tao naturally didn't dare to have any devious thoughts. Even if there was one, it could only appear when he killed Yang Qindong and got the money to escape to the end of the world. Seeing that Wu Yong was so tactful, Yen Tao nodded his head in satisfaction. But since we have to make preparations, we can't do without the Silvertails. Don't worry, big brother, Yen. I'll arrange for someone to send the Silvertails over tonight. Is 400,000 taels enough? It's enough, Yen Tao happily replied. In a sense, these 400,000 taels of silver were taken from the 800,000 taels that he deserved. According to the rules of the martial arts world, he had to collect half of it as a deposit. From the looks of it, Yen Tao was really prepared to help. After discussing the matter and appeasing Wu Yong, Yen Tao left Qingshan. However, he didn't go in the direction of the Ministry of Justice. Instead, he walked a few rounds on the streets as if he was bored. After confirming that no one had seen him, he went in the direction of the Yu residence. Yu Shuriyue, the current Minister of Justice, was deeply trusted by the current emperor. He should have had a bright future and limitless glory. However, because of a conflict with the Duke of Loyalty, Yang Chendong, his grandson, Yu Xiong, was sentenced to death. His eldest grandson, Yu Yuanbi, also suffered in prison. In addition, Su Yozhen was assigned to the Ministry of Justice as the left assistant minister with the intention of replacing Yu Shuriyue. The Yu residence, which was supposed to be bustling with people and carriages, became much quieter. After all, he was still the Minister of Justice. And there were still many officials who came to visit him every day. By the time Yen Tao arrived, he could only enter from the side door. The head constable of the Ministry of Justice. It sounded like a very prestigious title, but in the minister's residence, it was just a small official. If Yen Tao wasn't someone who was promoted by Yu Shuriyue and had come to the Yu residence before, and the gatekeeper knew him, it would be difficult for him to enter through the side door. Even if he entered the Yu residence, he might not be able to see the minister. He came to a slightly remote side hall and waited for more than 2 hours. After drinking a few pots of tea, he finally heard the sound of footsteps outside the door. Master is receiving guests in the front hall. Please wait a moment. Constable Yen. The Yu residence steward who was in charge of leading him said with a formal smile. Okay. Yen Tao knew that the steward was just being polite on the surface. Regardless of whether the minister was really receiving guests or not, if someone of his status wanted to see the minister, it was necessary to wait a little longer. This was the place where he could show his prestige. Speaking of which, Yen Tao's skills were not bad. Even in the Jianghu, he was quite famous. It was not an exaggeration to call him a first-class master. However, under the environment that emphasized culture and suppressed martial arts, not to mention a constable with good skills, even a general who killed on the battlefield would not have any status in the minister's residence. This was the rule under the influence of the Confucian school. Martial artists were not valued and were seen as simple-minded and physically developed. Such people had no future and could even be the main factor in civil strife. Merchants were suppressed because they were seen as people who only cared about profit. Such people, if there was milk, then there was mother. They had no father, country, or family in their eyes. For profit, they would do anything and betray anyone. Speaking of which, Yen Tao sat in a side hall and stayed there for more than half an hour. However, he sat upright, and there was no trace of anxiety on his face. It could be seen that he was a person who could achieve great things. Time passed little by little, and there was a sound of footsteps in the distance. Hearing the sound of footsteps, Yen Tao quickly stood up with a very respectful look. However, when the person appeared, he raised his head, and there was a slight surprise in his eyes. "Young master, you?" "That's right, it's me." "Grandfather knew that you were here, but there was something he couldn't get away from. So he let me come." "Ha! Constable Yen, take a seat." The person who came was Yu Yuanbi, Yu Shuriyue's most admired eldest grandson. In order to train him, he would usually be in charge of receiving guests when there was no important matter. This was also a method of training. The minister did not appear, but UNB did. Yen Tao was somewhat disappointed. However, when he thought about how Yu Xiong had died at the hands of the Duke of Loyalty, Yang Qindong, he had a glimmer of hope in his heart. Perhaps this person wanted revenge more than him. As a hot-blooded young man, he should be easier to fool than a minister like Yu Shiyue. After making up his mind, Yen Tao's expression became much calmer. He first sat down, then held a cup of tea, and said casually, "Actually, this constable didn't come here for anything. I just thought that the 7th day of young Master Yu Xiong's death is coming, so I came to pay my respects." Suddenly, Yu Xiong's name was mentioned. Yu Xiong's death could be said to be the shame of the entire Yu family. Now that someone mentioned it in front of him, and only as a chief constable, UNB's expression changed. He said with a livid face, "Yen Tao, what are you trying to do? Don't you want to work anymore?" "Young Master Yu, please calm down. Things are not what you think. In fact, this constable is here for this matter. Instead of keeping the matter of young Master Yu Xiong under wraps, it would be better to take revenge. That would be the only way to solve the problem. But I don't know if young Master Yu Xiong has the guts to do such a thing." As a chief constable, Yen Tao's ability to grasp people's hearts was very strong when interrogating criminals. This time, he used provocation to force UNB to make a choice. Revenge? Huh? You're just a lowly chief constable with an insignificant official position. How dare you speak of this lightly? Unless you have some ability, UNB could roughly guess Yen Tao's background. However, when he thought of Yang Qindong's power and ability, he still did not dare to do anything. Chapter 315. Just as young Master Yu said, this constable does have some ability. At least I still have some useful people in my hands. After saying all this with a smile on his face, Yen Tao suddenly leaned forward and said a name from his mouth. It was Wu Yong's name. The Black Water Gang had been wiped out overnight. Only the second in command, Wu Yong, had escaped. Now that they were in the middle of a large-scale manhunt, any smart person would be able to guess why Yen Tao suddenly mentioned this person. Oh, UNB's expression instantly lit up. He finally knew why Yen Tao had come to find him. He really did have some confidence. Just as UNB was thinking, Yen Tao's voice sounded in his ear again. "If the matter is done well, we can naturally take revenge. Even if it isn't done well, it has nothing to do with us. We won't lose anything. Besides, as long as the plan is well thought out, there shouldn't be any accidents in a surprise attack. After all, humans have flaws. Humans are made of flesh and blood. Swords and spears can take lives." "Not bad, not bad." UNB laughed loudly, then pointed to the teacup on the table and said, "Big brother, Yen, please have some tea." UNB had changed the way he addressed Yen Tao from Constable Yen to Big Brother Yen. This was his way of expressing their closeness, and it also meant that he would support the other party. How could Yen Tao not feel it? He immediately laughed and drank from the teacup. "Good, let's have some tea together. Speaking of which, the tea in the minister's residence is really good." "Ha! If Big Brother Yen likes it, you can bring some back later," UNB said with a face full of enthusiasm. After that, the two of them lowered their heads and conspired for a long time. When Yen Tao left satisfied, he went straight to his grandfather's study. UNB had made the decision on his own and agreed to cooperate with Yen Tao. This wasn't a whim, but because he knew that if the Yu family wanted to develop, Yang Qindong, this stumbling block, had to be kicked away. Otherwise, if they couldn't even protect themselves, how could they talk about spreading their name? After understanding all this, he predicted that even if his grandfather knew about this matter, he wouldn't object. Sure enough, he entered the study and explain to you Shuriwa why Yen Tao came. The Minister of Justice was silent for a while before nodding. Do things secretly. However, since we're going to make a move, we can't give the other party the slightest chance. You should also go and make some arrangements. If the time is right, you can add a stab. In short, it's fine if you don't make a move, but if you do, it must be a thunderous method. He never thought that his grandfather would put everything on the line and ask him to do it himself. Yuanbi couldn't help but say, excitedly, "Grandfather, don't worry. I'll make the arrangements right away. As long as there's a chance, I'll definitely make him suffer the pain of having his heart pierced by thousands of arrows." The reason why Yushuriwe was so ruthless was naturally because the situation in the imperial court was already pressuring him, especially after Su Yozhen became the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice. This person wantonly bought people's hearts and had already begun to shake his authority in the Ministry of Justice. If he couldn't deal with the foreign enemy Yang Qindong, it wouldn't be long before his position as Minister of Justice would be useless. Since there was no way out, he could only take the initiative to attack. Yen Tao's arrival was no doubt tantamount to giving him a chance to make a move. Although there were risks, but wealth was originally sought in the midst of danger. How could one achieve great things without being ruthless? Moreover, after Yen Tao left the residence, he went to contact Wu Yong. Yen Tao was like a walker walking in the dark. At night, he knocked on the door of Chung Shunin and saw the second-in-command of the Blackwater Gang, Wu Yong, who was waiting for news. Wu Yong was already burning with anxiety. He was even prepared to escape at any time, because he really didn't know whether Yen Tao was reliable or not. Although he was indebted to this person in the past, it didn't prevent him from suddenly killing him. However, the moment he saw the tall Yen Tao appear, Wu Yong still looked very calm. At least on the surface, there wasn't the slightest hint of fear or terror. To be able to become one of the 4 chief constables of the Ministry of Justice, Yen Tao was not only skilled in martial arts, but also unusually quick-witted. He might have thought of something long ago, but just didn't want to say it. Tonight, he came here for business. He went to the home of the Minister of the Ministry of Justice and gained a lot. This time, he came here to tell him part of his plan. "Second Master Wu, I've decided to help you. Here's a list of materials. They are all bloody men in the Green Forest. They only recognize money and not people. How to persuade them to help you? You just have to work hard. But remember, if there is no accident, there will be an opportunity in a few days. Whether you can seize it or not depends on you." After putting down the information on the mercenaries in the capital, Yen Tao stayed for a while longer before leaving. He knew of Wu Yong's abilities, and he was confident that he would have no problem recruiting these men to work for him for the time being. As for the people in the materials, in fact, they were some bandits with names in the Ministry of Justice. Some of them even had bloody cases. Such people were the so-called scum of society. However, it was undeniable that these people had a clean background. Even if someone wanted to use them, it would only be a temporary exchange of power and money. No one would support them. This way, it could be guaranteed that when they were used, the news would not be leaked out quickly. Moreover, with Wu Yong's intelligence, he would not make things too clear. As long as he paid, he would let these people work for him. As for who he killed, those people would not know until the last moment. In a few days, Wu Yong should be able to do this. As the local boss of the underworld in the capital and the former second-in-command of the Blackwater Gang, his abilities should not be underestimated. In 1451 AD, the second year of Jingtai of the Ming dynasty, the Miao people's uprising began. Ming and Ming were the princes of the Minzhuang king Zhu Yuanzhang, the 18th son of Zhu Yuanzhang. In the first year of Jingtai, 1450, Zhu Yuanzhang died, followed by Ming. Ming the king of Guangdong, was brave and strong. His family, Duan Yuhong, was favored by the king because of his excellent skills. Later, Yu Libin said that Ming was abnormal and should be the ruler of the world. Thus, Ming started a rebellion. He made a fake imperial edict and sent Duan Yuhong, Meng Neng, and Chen Tianxing to the Miao people's territory. He used silver seals and gold coins to lure the Miao people to attack Wugong. After the Ming dynasty's southern emperor, Zhu Qizhen, heard the news, he sent the governor of Huguang, Wang Lai, and the chief military officer, Liang Luo, to suppress the rebellion. After Zhu Qizhen went through the Tumu incident, his personality became more gloomy and his methods became more ruthless. After he gained a foothold in the original capital of Nanjing, he began to reform the governance of officials and started to train soldiers. Courage after knowing shame. Because of his experience, Zhu Qizhen knew that the so-called under one, above all, under the Ming dynasty, and under the emperor's wisdom were all fake. Only a strong military force and an abundant national treasury would be the true core of the country. In order to achieve this goal, he issued a series of orders, and the entire South began to expand the source of soldiers. Under the eyes of many, soldiers were forcefully arresting strong men, causing the originally rich South to be in a mess. Who knew how many families were torn apart because of this? Because of this, some scholars openly expressed their opposition. Some even said that this was clearly militaristic and not the way of a saint. In the past, the emperor had always been very tolerant of scholars. This was because many times they represented the will of the people and the will of the world. If one offended them, it would be difficult to have a good reputation among the people, and there might even be chaos. However, Zhu Qizhen, who had a goal in mind, was ruthless this time. Any scholar who dared to talk about national affairs, especially those who criticized his actions, were all arrested. He did not hesitate to become enemies with some scholars because he wanted to restore the glory of the great Ming dynasty. He wanted to unify the north and south of the great Ming dynasty. He wanted to wash away the shame of his past. He wanted to be a wise ruler of a generation, a ruler of prosperity. In order to achieve his goal, he would do anything. It was also because of this that many scholars were implicated. Although some aristocratic families were still deeply rooted and were not implicated by this matter, they still had their own opinions. At this time, after King Min Zhuang succeeded the throne, he declared that the people of the world should be ruled by the people of the world. He declared that he wanted to become the ruler of the world. The difference between here and in history was that the Miao tribe leader Yang Wenbo supported his actions. The reason was simple. Previously, when Zhu Qizhen recruited soldiers, he caused a lot of trouble in the south, which made Yang Wenbo hate him. In addition, Zhu Qizhen was no longer the only ruler of the great Ming dynasty. In the north, there was still the existence of the substitute Zhu Qiyu, who was enough to compete with Zhu Qizhen. This greatly weakened Zhu Qizhen's strength. Therefore, Yang Wenbo made a decision that was different from history. He supported the king of Min Zhuang instead. With Yang Wenbo's support, King Min's strength increased greatly. Wugong, which was located in the southwest of Hunan province, was broken through in 3 days. After winning the first battle and taking down King Min's emblem, he finally gained the recognition of some aristocratic families. After receiving some support in terms of gold, silver, and grain, his power increased. He had the potential to become the king of the south. When King Min's matter came out, Zhu Qizhen naturally flew into a rage. While sending troops, he also sighed in the palace. Zhu Qiyu took the throne when his life and death was uncertain. It could be said that there was a reason for this, although Zhu Qiyu did not recognize him later. When he came to Nanjing to establish the South Ming dynasty, Zhu Qiyu did not do anything to stop him. To put it bluntly, Zhu Qiyu acknowledged his existence in private. On the surface, Zhu Qiyu still called him King Yu. This was something that could not be helped. However, who was Zhu Huizhen? He was just a small descendant of King Min Zhuang. How dare he call himself a king? This was touching his reverse scale. Even if there was internal friction, he would not let him make a big deal out of it. In the palace, Zhu Qizhen was not in a good mood. He was so tired that Empress Qian was also in a bad mood. Chapter 3:16. It was a common situation in the great Ming dynasty at that time, not to mention that Empress Qian had always loved Zhu Qizhen. If Empress Qian was worried, she would be more worried. Empress, His Majesty, is talented and intelligent. You don't have to worry too much. A young eunuch was standing beside Empress Qian and speaking carefully. He was a eunuch who was not very old, but had an extraordinary manner of speech. He was Mao Mu, the eunuch who had been indebted to Yang Qindong and was later ordered to follow Empress Qian out of the capital. Before the Tumu incident, Mao Mu already had some status in the imperial harem. Zhu Qizhen's life was unknown, and the chief eunuch, Wang Zhen, died in the chaos. As a eunuch promoted by Wang Zhen, he was also implicated. It was only after he took out most of his wealth that he was able to save his life. It was not until Yang Qindong returned to the capital that everything became better. Later, he approached Empress Qian on behalf of Yang Qindong and finally came to Nanjing. After seeing Zhu Qizhen become the South Emperor, he became the most trusted eunuch of Empress Qian and had some status in Zhu Qizhen's heart. Seeing that his master, Empress Qian, was in a depressed mood, Mao Mu tried to explain carefully. Alas, His Majesty's fate is not good. Since he came to Nanjing, he has always wanted to be the master of prosperity, but things are not going well. Every time I see this, I feel uneasy. I always want to do something, but I am short-sighted. I can only work hard to deal with the affairs of the imperial harem and try not to let His Majesty worry. Empress Qian shook her head and was angry at herself. Speaking of which, Empress Qian did love Zhu Qizhen very much. In history, she had done her best to protect her man, but she also had a tragic end. In this life, because of the appearance of Yang Qindong, she did not have to be so wronged, but because she loved Zhu Qizhen too deeply. How could she be happy when Zhu Qizhen was unhappy? Seeing that Empress Qian was in a bad mood, Mao Mu blinked and then said in a low voice, "Empress, in fact, the problem of Nanjing is not that difficult. You just need to send an army and sweep it." Sweep away. Empress Qian trusted Mao Mu very much, so she was not angry because of the other party's arrogance. She just shook her head after listening. "Although I don't know what political affairs are, I have heard that Zhu Huizhen is now in contact with Rongkang, Xiping, Homubin, Duke Qian. In the name of jointly ruling the world, his power is getting stronger and stronger." Rongkang, Xiping Homubin, was a member of the Mu clan. They had been living in Yunnan for many years and had been helping the great Ming dynasty resist the covetous eyes of Myanmar, Laos, and Vietnam until the end of the Ming dynasty. At the time when he was in the middle of the great Ming dynasty, he still had some strength. If he cooperated with Zhu Huihua, it would undoubtedly be like a heavy hammer smashing towards Zhu Qiyu. The politics of the southern Ming Empire would truly be in danger. As the head of the palace eunuchs, Mao Mu was second only to Chao Jixiang, who was favored by Zhu Qizhen. He naturally knew about this matter. Hearing Empress Qian's words, he smiled. "Empress need not worry. The Mu family's loyalty is not a problem. He will not walk together with a traitor like Zhu Huizhen." Yes, His Majesty has also said this. Ben Gong also knows. But I heard that it is not peaceful there. Several small countries are beginning to stir. It is not easy for Rongkong, Shiping-ho, to suppress them. He is unable to send troops to help His Majesty quell the rebellion. Empress Qian first nodded, as if sighing for Mu Bin's inability to send troops. But then she shook her head. Thinking that the current situation was not as she wished, she felt a bit sad. Since Rongkong, Shiping-ho, is unable to send troops, why not ask the Duke of Loyalty and Courage to help? Mao Mu seemed to speak emotionally, but after saying this, he quickly shut his mouth and knelt on the ground. Your Majesty, this subject misspoke. And, facing Mao Mu's performance, Empress Qian was first stunned. Then something seemed to flash through her mind. Wait, what did you just say? This subject misspoke. Empress, please punish me. At this moment, Mao Mu lowered his head deeply, looking like he had done something wrong. Mao Mu's actions were indeed too much. How could he, a eunuch, talk about national affairs at any time? The aftermath of Wang Zhen's intimidation of the government was not over. Based on what he said just now, even if he had to be convicted, it would not be too much. Empress Qian did not think so much. She was only thinking about Zhu Qizhen. She did not intend to pursue Mao Mu's unintentional words. On the contrary, when the title of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage came out, the young man who saved her from the palace flashed through her mind. For some reason, she seemed to see a light in her originally gloomy heart. Empress Qian seemed to be talking to herself, but also seemed to be asking Mao Mu in front of her. Mao Mu's head was originally lowered, but his eyes were constantly moving. He knew his identity. He was a spy arranged by Yang Qindong around Zhu Qizhen. When something big happened here, he could ensure that he could get accurate information at the first time. This time, the Security Bureau, which rarely contacted him, directly found him and said that the 6th young master was preparing to go south. They asked him to coordinate and find an opportunity to command troops. Since he took the job, he had to do it. Originally, Mao Mu did not know how to ask. Using Zhu Huihua's matter, he found a breakthrough. Seeing that Empress Qian seemed to be moved, he tried to answer carefully. Your Highness, this subject thinks it should be possible. After all, when the emperor was in trouble, he did a lot. Now that the army is in chaos, if the Duke of Loyalty and Courage can come, it should not be a big problem. He has the title of Army God. Army God? Yes, this empress has heard of him. But he is now in the capital in the north. Will he come here to help the emperor? Empress Qian asked uncertainly. Whether he will or not, we have to try. After all, he is a subject of the great Ming, the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. Now that the army in the Walla in the north has retreated for a long time, presumably the Duke of Loyalty and Courage will not be of much use there. Mao Mu was still speaking carefully, but the speed of his speech was getting faster and faster, and his mind was getting more agile. Yes, we can try, Empress Qian muttered to herself, and then suddenly stood up as if she thought of something. At this moment, the helpless look on her face was completely different from before. It was as if she had suddenly found a good way. She wanted to see the emperor. Yang Family Academy. After experiencing the bombardment of Blackwell Street, the enthusiasm of the students here was even higher. The fact told everyone that what they were learning would be the most advanced thing in the current society. Thinking about how the Mountainhead's science could create such a huge commotion, and how it could be so lethal, everyone's learning was no longer supervised by others. They all took the initiative to learn. Because of her identity, and because she was a girl, Junko did not get the opportunity to go to Blackwell Street to observe. But from the mouths of other students, she still learned what happened that night. Although the students had different descriptions of the cannons, there was one thing that couldn't be wrong, and that was the power of the cannons. They could kill people as if they were weeds. thinking that if such a thing could be used by her father, then the situation in Japan might be better. Her father would no longer be a puppet, and he would have real power, and then lead Japan into a stage of rapid development. After having such thoughts in her heart, Junko could no longer calm down. She began to have ideas about Yang Qindong. Junko's Chinese was barely passable, but in terms of learning, she naturally could not be compared with the students of the great Ming dynasty. After all, her foundation was not solid, but fortunately, she had a shortcut, and that was to directly find the owner of this advanced artillery, Yang Qindong. After having this idea and thinking about the benefits she could give, Junko saw that Yang Qindong was about to leave after the class, so she trotted all the way to catch up with him. Yang Qindong, who was holding a textbook in his hand, felt Junko chasing behind him, and his footsteps could not help but slow down a little. Mountain head, wait a minute. His footsteps paused slightly. Yang Qindong looked back with a faint smile on his face. Junko, what's the hurry? Mountain head, no. Zhongdan Kun, I have something to discuss with you. Junko thought that when talking about business, it was better not to talk about it with the relationship between a student and a teacher. Oh, seeing that Junko was so formal, Yang Qindong nodded slightly and said, then let's talk while walking. The path leading to the inner courtyard of Yang village, one tall and one short, a man and a woman slowly walked under the afterglow of the setting sun. Zhongdan Kun, I heard about the bombardment of Kirajing Street. I want to buy those artillery. Name a price. No matter how much money it is, I can find a way to get it. Junko's voice was filled with great determination. She had known Yang Qindong for a long time, and she knew that he did not like to beat around the bush, so she simply went straight to the point. By artillery? Yang Qindong was stunned for a moment before he shook his head. I'm sorry, I borrowed the cannon. The implication was that the artillery was not his. Junko naturally knew a little about this. She knew that there were powerful mercenaries behind this Zhongdan Kun. Presumably, those artillery should be in the hands of those mercenaries. But even though she knew this, Junko still put her hope on Yang Qindong. Lord Zhongdan, Junko knows your relationship with the mercenaries. Can you negotiate with them to sell me 2 cannons? If you can't, just one is fine too. How much money do you want? We can discuss it. Junko wanted to transport the artillery back to Japan, then bombard the general's residence, just like how they bombarded Kirajing Street, razing it to the ground. In this way, the general and his aides would die under the artillery, and his subordinates would be like a group of dragons without a leader. Then, the emperor would take the opportunity to seize the real power. And to do all this, she could only do it through Yang Qindong. Her face was full of hope. No matter how much money it is, Yang Qindong pretended to be very curious and asked. Chapter 317. Yes, we can discuss any amount. Junko blinked her beautiful big eyes. Any amount is negotiable. Yang Qindong repeated this sentence and saw the sincerity in the other party's eyes. He couldn't help but smile and said, but do you know that when I wanted to buy one, the other party asked for 10 million taels? 10 million taels. Hiss. After hearing the price, a look of shock flashed across Junko Yu's face, followed by hesitation and confusion. Ha ha ha. Yang Qindong couldn't help but laugh after seeing her reaction. He turned and left. He knew that Junko had to think about some things carefully before coming to a decision. He couldn't push her too hard at this moment. As a person of the future, Yang Qindong naturally didn't have a good impression of Japan. If possible, he would bring Lung Feng over. Rather than say that he was going to reform them, it was better to swallow them whole. It would be more satisfying to rule the world. However, although Lung Feng's development was going smoothly, It was still very difficult to reach a certain scale due to the limitations of the environment, population, and wealth. Even if he was in the capital, he could only do things to intimidate others. He couldn't really overthrow them. Where would he find the time and effort to do anything to Japan? He wasn't strong enough, but that didn't mean that he couldn't do something first. For example, he could disrupt the internal affairs of Japan. This way, it would be much easier to deal with the empty Japan in the future. For this matter, Yang Qindong had thought of a few methods in his mind. However, he was still far away from Japan. A small fight wouldn't solve the problem, but he wasn't strong enough to fight a big fight. Without full confidence, he didn't do anything. Junko taking the initiative to look for him might be a chance for Yang Qindong. How could he let go of a chance to earn money? As for asking for 10 million taels of silver, it might seem like a lot to others, but he knew that Junko would definitely agree. However, in Yang Qindong's heart, making money was secondary. More importantly, he wanted to see the civil strife in Japan. He had already done some things before, but he always felt that it was not enough. He still needed to do more things. In that way, when Japan faced internal and external troubles, the pressure would be a lot less. After leaving Yang Qindong, Junko went to find her guard captain, Kobayashi. During this period of time, Shaolin was like a sponge, constantly absorbing water. The training methods of the Yang family manor were not hidden from him. After he saw it, he learned a lot. Only then did he realize how soldiers should be trained. Only then could they be truly elite. When Junko came to find Kobayashi, he was recording something in Japanese in his room. A good memory was not as good as a good pen. This was a common saying in many cases. Your Highness. As soon as she saw Junko open the door, Kobayashi was about to salute her out of habit. Forget it. There's no one else here. Junko shook her head, then sat on the chair for receiving guests, then looked at Kobayashi with sparkling eyes and asked, You must have heard about the artillery, right? Yes, I heard about it. I also took the time to go to Kurajing Street to take a look. The destructive power was really amazing. Shaolin, who replied, couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine when he thought of the collapsed houses that he saw. He even wondered what kind of destruction such a powerful cannon would cause if it hit Japanese soil. Who would be able to withstand it? Yang Qindong's sense of mystery and power strengthened in Kobayashi's heart. Then tell me, if these things could be used by your father, would the Supreme General still dare to be so domineering? After Kobayashi finished speaking, Junko lightly opened her red lips and asked, what? For a moment, Kobayashi was a little confused by this question. But after he reacted, he said with some excitement, Is he willing to give such powerful firearms to us? I bet he's already talked to him. We can buy it. But the price is a little more expensive, 10 million taels per cannon. Junko nodded. She didn't know if this was good news or bad news. Hiss! Kobayashi sucked in a breath of cold air. It was obvious that he was really shocked by this number. 10 million taels, even at the peak of the Ming dynasty. It took 2 years of tax revenue to reach this amount. Japan was much smaller than the Ming dynasty, so it was unknown how long it would take to gather this number. But thinking about it, although the number was huge, if they could really get it, it would be worth it. Not to mention that with this thing, the emperor would be the real emperor. Just with the specimen, they could later imitate it. Everyone had one head and 2 shoulders. So why could others create it, but they couldn't? Thinking of this, Kobayashi's eyes began to burn with passion. Your Highness, this is a good thing. Even you think so? If I send you back, will you be able to persuade father? Junko was waiting for Kobayashi to say this. The sudden change made Kobayashi finally understand the purpose of Junko's visit, and he couldn't help but fall into silence. 10 million taels of silver was a large amount, and he had to return to Japan. But his status was low, so he couldn't guarantee that he would be able to do it. The best way was, of course, to let Junko go back, but Kobayashi also knew that if Junko left now, who knew what would happen? Even if he had the money in the future, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to buy the cannon. If that was the case, wouldn't it be a waste? While Kobayashi was still hesitating, Junko said anxiously, "Kobayashi, I will write a letter to father, please." After saying this, she bowed deeply to Kobayashi. "Your Highness, please don't. I will try." Kobayashi saw Junko's action and knew that he couldn't avoid it. He thought that it was better to give it a try, and if it didn't work, he would just take a trip back to Japan, and then find an opportunity to come back here. Kobayashi finally agreed, and Junko's face flashed with a charming smile. "Then I will go and talk to him, and then I will write a letter to father. You should be prepared." Junko quickly appeared in front of Yang Qindong and said that she wanted to buy the cannon. Of course, she still didn't say her identity, only that her family was very interested in it, and that such a powerful cannon could be sold at a higher price once it was shipped to Japan. 10 million taels of silver. This was already a heaven-defying price. Yang Qindong really couldn't think of any other price. But for Junko's completely self-deceiving idea, he could only nod. He also promised that once he saw the money, he didn't need to come to the great Ming dynasty anymore, and he could go to Little Luli Island to trade. And for safety, the mercenaries could escort the cannon to Japan's territorial waters. Junko was naturally happy that her safety was guaranteed. She was still very confident about whether or not she could get the cannon with the money. The source of this confidence was naturally her understanding of Yang Qindong. She knew that this person was a person who kept his promises, and he would never deceive her. Soon, Junko finished writing a letter. She wrote down what she had seen and heard in the Great Ming Dynasty, including the incident where her country sent samurai to attack the Tianjin garrison a while ago. She emphasized that the Great Ming Dynasty was now very powerful, and it was far from what the weak Japan could touch. She also hoped that father could stabilize the situation in the country and strengthen himself first. As for the power of the cannon, she wrote in detail. The most important thing was that with this weapon, it could instantly turn the general's mansion into a piece of scorched earth, and at that time, it would be the time when the imperial power would be concentrated. That night, Kobayashi left with the letter written by Junko and under the protection of 2 soldiers sent by Yang Qindong. He would go straight to Tianjin Guard, where there would be a special ship to send him back to Japan. Sometimes opportunities were fleeting, sometimes rare, but sometimes they came as they wished. It was unknown whether the Yu family and Wu Yong's luck was too good. But after only 3 days, the opportunity appeared. On the night of Kobayashi's departure, something happened that even Yang Qindong didn't expect. It didn't seem artificial at all, and the fact was that it was just a coincidence. The crown prince, Zhu Jianxin, was ill. As the only son of Zhu Qiyu and the future successor of the emperor, his headache and fever were also national affairs. Because the illness happened at night and was a little urgent, the imperial physician, Li Qing, was called to the East Palace. After taking the pulse, he gave a prescription. After the medicine was boiled and taken, the illness not only didn't get better, but also became worse. At first, it was just diarrhea, but later it became vomiting. This frightened the people who served here. The eunuchs first detained the imperial physician, Li Qing, and then reported the matter to the emperor, Zhu Qiyu, and Empress Han. After receiving the news, Daizong and Empress Han came to the East Palace with the imperial physician's office. Li Qing was also sent to the Ministry of Justice's prison to await punishment. Who was Li Qing? He wasn't as simple as an ordinary eighth-rank imperial physician. He had another identity, Yang Qindong's fifth brother-in-law, the Duke of Loyalty. As soon as something happened to Li Qing, the Li residents in the capital received the news. Fifth sister, Yang Qindong, was even more anxious, and the first thing she thought of was her sixth brother, Yang Qindong. She hated that it was still dark and the news couldn't be spread. As soon as the sky brightened, the security bureau in the city sent the news, saying that her fifth brother-in-law, Li Qing, was imprisoned in the Ministry of Justice's prison. It was said that he had injured the crown prince, Zhu Jianshan, but the details of the matter still needed to be investigated. Prepare the carriage, let's go to the capital. Yang Qindong's feelings for his fifth sister were still very good. He could guess that his fifth sister was probably very anxious at this time, so he decided to go to the capital personally to ask for an explanation. Chapter 3:18. Yang Qindong suddenly entered the capital and saw fifth sister's carriage at the Yongding gate. Immediately, Yang Qindong comforted fifth sister and asked her to return to the residence and wait. He would investigate everything and give her an explanation. With sixth brother taking action, Yang Li was naturally relieved. She also knew that it was not good for a woman to appear in public at this time, so she returned to the residence. At that time, many people saw the scene of the conversation, and the news quickly spread to all sides. When Yen Tao heard the news, he couldn't hide the joy on his face. The Duke of Loyalty suddenly entered the capital, so the security around him would not be as tight as usual. This was their opportunity. He immediately went straight to Chengshan Inn to inform Wu Yong to make preparations. At the same time, the Yu residents also received the news that the eldest grandson, Yu Yuanbi, quietly left the residence and went straight to the embroidered uniform guard. There were some elite soldiers who received money from the Yu family there, and now was the time to use them. After Yang Qindong entered the city, he went straight to the prison of the Ministry of Justice. The prison of the Ministry of Justice. 2 large stone lions stood majestically in front of the gate. Soldiers in armor stood in all directions. Constables in yamen uniforms could be seen walking back and forth from time to time, keeping an eye on the important criminals locked up here. This was another place to imprison serious criminals, second only to the imperial prison. In the great Ming dynasty, there were usually 3 places to imprison guilty people in the capital. The first was the imperial prison. Most of the people locked up, there were people of high status, such as members of the imperial family or high-ranking officials. The second was the prison of the Ministry of Justice. Those who were locked up, there were people of some status or who had committed serious crimes. The third was the prison of the Supreme Court. Relatively speaking, those who were locked up, there were commoners who had committed minor crimes and did not have much of a background. As a place to imprison serious criminals, the level of defense here was naturally not low. If ordinary people wanted to enter to visit, in addition to having a warrant from the head of the Ministry of Justice, some rich people were willing to spend a lot of money to see the prisoner. However, the moment the luxurious carriage appeared here, these rules obviously did not apply. This was because the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Su Yozhen, had been waiting here for a long time. It wasn't Yang Qindong who gave him the order through the security bureau. It was all Su Yozhen's guess. Li Qing of the Imperial Academy of Medicine was the 5th brother-in-law of the Duke of Loyalty. Based on his understanding, it was impossible for the Duke to not show up. Her guess was correct. Su Yozhen couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief when she saw the one-of-a-kind luxurious carriage. What he was most worried about was that the loyal guild, who never suffered any losses, would forcefully break into the Ministry of Justice's prison. Moreover, this matter was related to the current crown prince. It was hard to predict what kind of consequences would arise. Fortunately, he still appeared here in advance. It seemed that some mistakes could be avoided. The carriage stopped, and the curtain was opened by the accompanying tiger's mane. Yang Qindong appeared in front of the Ministry of Justice's prison. Su Yozhen, who was standing on the steps, quickly walked over and said, "This official greets the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. May I know why you are in such a hurry?" With his back facing the crowd, Su Yozhen faced Yang Qindong and tried his best to blink a few times, as if to remind him of something. Yang Qindong's face showed a trace of satisfaction at Su Yozhen's appearance. As expected of an important figure in history, his ability to grasp people's hearts was not low. Since the other party was standing here, it would be easier for him to do some things. "So, it is Assistant Minister Su. This Duke wants to see Li Qing of the Imperial Academy of Medicine. Please make it convenient." This. Su Yozhen's face was somewhat bitter. He had already given him a hint. How could the High Duke still say such things? As if he knew what Su Yozhen was thinking, Yang Qindong actually laughed. Then he walked forward and closed the distance between them. At the same time, he said in a voice that only the two of them could hear, "I just want to understand the situation. I won't break into the prison and won't cause any trouble. Don't worry." When the voice reached Su Yozhen's ears, a trace of doubt appeared on his face. Was the Duke of Loyalty and Courage really going to be reasonable this time? Was he really going to take Li Qing away after seeing him? At this moment, he was somewhat doubtful. In fact, Su Yozhen was being too careful to measure the heart of a gentleman. Because of his military accomplishments and the fact that he had beaten up the Japanese envoy, it was easy for people to have preconceived notions. In fact, Yang Qindong had always been very reasonable. Since Yang Qindong said to be at ease, he must know the importance of this matter. As such, Su Yozhen could not say anything. In fact, even if the other party insisted on taking Li Qing away, there was not much he could do to stop him. Su Yozhen agreed. With the second in command of the Ministry of Justice's left assistant minister following him, the path to the Ministry of Justice's prison was naturally smooth. Soon, they saw Li Qing, who was in a solitary cell. Li Qing looked to be in his early 30s. He was also born into a scholarly family. Because he was extremely passionate about medicine, he had studied it from a young age. He had quite a bit of success. Later on, through his family's connections, he entered the Imperial Hospital to take up a post. It was precisely because of his passion for medicine that even when he was in prison, the first thing he thought about was Zhu Jianxin's illness. His brows were tightly knitted, and he did not make a sound. It seemed like he was still thinking about the illness and did not take his current situation seriously at all. This is Empress Hang's imperial decree. The matter has not been investigated clearly yet, so no one is making things difficult for him. When they arrived outside the solitary cell, Su Yozhen wanted to dismiss the people beside him to give Yang Qindong and Li Qing a chance to be alone. There is no need for this. Yang Qindong raised his right hand slightly. His trip this time was just to visit a prisoner. It was not like he was doing anything shameful. There was no need to have the others leave at all. This would instead easily cause others to make unfounded guesses. At the same time, it would also have an adverse effect on Su Yozhen. Su Yozhen did not allow the others to leave. Just as he was wondering what Yang Qindong was going to do, he squatted down. He squatted down and looked at Li Qing, who was behind the iron door, and asked, "Fifth brother-in-law, what exactly is going on? Also, how is the crown prince's illness? Can you tell me about it?" "Oh, Qindong is here." Li Qing, who had been meditating, was interrupted by Yang Qindong's voice. Only then did he realize where he was. He couldn't help but bitterly smile and say, "It is rare for the loyal Duke to come and see me. I am endlessly grateful." "Okay, Fifth brother-in-law, let's talk about serious matters. What is going on with the crown prince's illness? Yang Qindong did not beat around the bush and went straight to the point. All of this was seen by Su Yozhen. He could not help but admire Li Qing's character. Just now, when he first called out Qindong Lai, it was clear that he did not realize where he was. He only thought that it was because he was greeting someone at home. However, when he found out that he was in a prison cell, he was not too surprised. Instead, he expressed his gratitude. If he was the one being thrown into prison, he definitely wouldn't be able to maintain his composure. While thinking this, Su Yozhen noticed that at this moment, Li Qing was really telling Yang Qindong about the crown prince's illness. He was speechless in his heart. What was going on? Shouldn't they be asking who Li Qing had offended and who he suspected of being framed by? What was the point of talking about his illness now? It was clear that Su Yozhen was judging others by his own standards. He believed that there must be someone framing him for this to happen. However, Yang Qindong had already thought it through. Perhaps it was because of the illness, which was why he asked about medicine. Li Qing was a knowledgeable person. He was especially knowledgeable when it came to medicine. If it was about other things, perhaps he could stay silent for a long time. However, when it came to professional matters, he spoke with assurance and spoke about Zhu Jianshan's illness, diarrhea, abdominal pain, bloating, nausea, vomiting, headache, fever. After a stool test, it was yellow and watery. I've already written a prescription, but considering the crown prince's young age and poor health, I didn't dare to use too much. I only used half of the usual amount. But who would have thought that his illness would worsen and he would vomit? This is all my fault. I'm really speechless. Li Qing spoke for a long time. There were many words that Su Yozhen did not understand. However, when he looked at Yang Qindong, he stood there and nodded as if he understood. Okay, I understand. How about this? You stay here and don't make a fuss. I will make sure that nothing happens to you. After finally understanding the truth, Yang Qindong had some guesses in his heart. After comforting Li Qing, he turned to Su Yozhen and said seriously, "My fifth brother-in-law is here. If he is treated unnaturally, your Ministry of Justice should know the consequences. Loyal Duke, don't worry. Our Ministry of Justice does things based on evidence." With someone watching, Su Yozhen naturally spoke with an official tone. That would be for the best. Yang Qindong nodded and left with large strides. At the entrance of the Ministry of Justice, he re-entered the luxurious carriage. However, the carriage did not leave for a long time. Su Yozhen, who was waiting to see him off, was puzzled. Su Yozhen did not understand what Yang Qindong was doing. Just as he was about to ask, the curtain of the carriage was opened again. Yang Qindong appeared with a box in his hand. "Give this to the crown prince. His illness should be under control. Take it." Tiger's Mane handed the box to Su Yozhen. Yang Qindong's voice sounded again. "I will not leave the capital. If the effect is not good, Your Majesty can send people to arrest me. However, if he does not dare to take this medicine and does not trust me, then don't blame me for reasoning with him." After saying this, the curtain of the carriage was lowered again. Su Yozhen stood there with a puzzled expression. Chapter 319. However, since Yang Qindong had said so, what else could Su Yozhen do? She could only nod her head and head back to the palace. In the carriage, Yang Qindong sighed. After hearing Li Qing's words, he went into the large warehouse to investigate and found out that Zhu Jianshan was suffering from viral enteritis. This illness was naturally not a serious illness in the future, but in the past, it could have been fatal. Thinking back, Zhu Jianshan's early death might have had something to do with this. This matter was not complicated, and it was not that the imperial physicians were not skilled. It was just that the crown prince's illness came too quickly. In addition, he was a child and had a weak body. If strong medicine could not be used, it might harm the body and cause a greater rebound. People would always say that many times the imperial physicians were not as good as some barefoot doctors when it came to treating illnesses. This was actually a misconception. To be able to enter the imperial hospital, which one of them did not have real skills, after going through layers of selection, and their family background was clean, the reason why some illnesses were not as good as the treatment methods of the country doctors was because the patients they faced were either rich or noble. These people had a common problem, and that was that life was very precious. For example, if they had the same illness, if they were ordinary people, it was fine if they died, but if they survived, it would be a skill that could make them famous. The barefoot doctors could naturally do things without restrictions. Sometimes they even came to treat patients with experimental methods. However, in the imperial hospital, it was completely different. They first had to ensure that they did not make any mistakes and protect themselves. In this kind of environment, it was fine if they did not do well, but they could not mess things up. Most of the time, they used conservative methods. Some small illnesses would not be cured quickly due to various misgivings, and it was not uncommon for it to become a serious illness. What was Zhu Jianxin's status? The crown prince. He was the future emperor. In addition, his birth mother was Empress Hang, the eldest son of the first wife, and the only son of the substitute emperor, Zhu Qiyu. His importance could be seen. There really wasn't the slightest bit of accident or carelessness. Li Qing was a good example to learn from. Li Qing's matter also rang an alarm bell for the other imperial physicians. What if his body couldn't take it, and there were side effects? There was no need for that. Ordinary methods were too slow to take effect, and it was normal for new situations to occur at any time. As a result, they were all hesitant and wanted to decline. In the face of such a situation, Zhu Qixin was naturally enraged. He even threatened that if anything happened to his son, he would find trouble with these imperial physicians. But even so, no one would take the initiative to stand out and cause trouble. Most of the time, it was one thing to be punished passively, but it was another thing to take the initiative to take responsibility and look for trouble. It was at this moment that Su Yozhen arrived. He brought the medicine that Yang Qindong had given him. It was a small box with a strange packaging. Inside it was a long red and white pill. In fact, it was just the most common enteritis calming capsule in the future. Through Li Qing's description and his confident tone, Yang Qindong had a rough understanding of his condition. After entering the carriage, he flashed into the large warehouse. After another round of investigation, he confirmed that the crown prince Zhu Jianxin was most likely suffering from viral enteritis. Then, he took out the medicine for the illness. The existence of the large warehouse was an unlimited cheating device. Anything that was placed inside would never expire. This was also Yang Qindong's greatest reliance. After Su Yozhen received the capsule, he came all the way to the imperial palace. It would be a lie to say that he did not have any suspicions or speculations. But when he thought of how much effort and money the Duke of Loyalty had spent on him, if something happened to him, it would not be in the other party's interest. When he thought of Yang Qindong's strange methods, he finally chose to believe him. Of course, he could only be responsible for delivering the capsule. As for whether the emperor would let Zhu Jianxin take it, that was something he could not do. In the imperial palace, the imperial physician's self-protection made Zhu Qiyu furious. As soon as Su Yozhen appeared and presented him with the medicine, he saw a turning point. He immediately ordered a few imperial physicians to study the medicine to see if it was poisonous. He even purposely had a eunuch take the medicine. After ensuring that there was no danger, he finally gave it to the crown prince. The medicine started to take effect. The crown prince did not feel as uncomfortable and fell into a deep sleep. Several imperial physicians came forward to check his pulse and confirmed that his condition had improved a lot. At this moment, Zhu Qiyu finally let out a sigh of relief. Good. Beloved official Su has done a meritorious service by presenting the medicine. Reward. Zhu Qiyu, who was in a good mood, looked at Su Yozhen and was particularly pleasing to the eye. With a putong sound, Su Yozhen knelt on the ground. He hurriedly explained in detail that the medicine was delivered by the Duke of Loyalty. He also emphasized the matter of Li Qing from the Imperial Hospital. With meritorious service, no one would push it away. However, Yang Qindong was still waiting for news in front of the Ministry of Justice's prison. At this moment, how could Su Yozhen dare to be greedy? Zhu Qiyu stood there and quietly listened to everything. After the matter was clear, he couldn't help but feel a lingering fear. He originally thought that the medicine was a folk prescription that Su Yozhen had obtained. In addition, the matter was urgent, so he did not ask too much. Now that he knew that it was done by Yang Qindong, he was worried that this medicine that he had never seen before might have other side effects. After all, the crown prince had an accident. When he was in danger, there was no one to inherit his mantle. If Yang Qindong was suspected of rebelling, doing things like this was not impossible. He had some doubts in his heart. After all, Yang Qindong's power had long created a situation where his meritorious service shocked the emperor. Logically speaking, based on his meritorious service and the things he had done, it would not be excessive to give him the title of one of the three dukes. However, Zhu Qiyu did not do so. It was because his weakness could easily create a sharp contrast with the other party's strength. Fortunately, this Duke of Loyalty and Courage followed the rules. When he had nothing to do, he would do his best to be a teacher in the Yang family manner. He also rarely interacted with the important officials in court. As the emperor, he was very satisfied with this kind of method of not forming cliques. In order to compromise, as long as Yang Qindong did not do things too ostentatiously, he would also turn a blind eye. For example, when he beat up the Japanese envoy and wrestled with Minister Yu Shuriwei, he only reprimanded him. He did not do anything excessive. It seemed like the well water did not interfere with the river water, but in reality, both sides were secretly on guard. In this kind of environment, if Zhu Qiyu knew that the medicine was given by Yang Qindong, he probably would not dare to eat it. He did not reprimand Su Yozhen for not explaining the source of the medicine first, because Zhu Qiyu also knew that once she explained it clearly, the crown prince's condition would worsen. All right, Zhen understands the matter. It seems that imperial physician Li Qing was wrongly accused this time. How about this? You release him and promote him by 1 rank. As Zhu Qiyu spoke, he waved his hand, indicating that Su Yozhen could leave. Yes, Your Majesty. After Su Yozhen agreed, she bowed and left. In his heart, he understood that this matter was over. He didn't reward Yang Qindong, who had taken out the medicine, because the emperor didn't want to have any more dealings with him. However, raising Wang Qing's rank was actually a gesture of goodwill. The Duke of Loyalty and Courage entered the city, and it seemed that he entered the city in a hurry, so there were not many guards around him. As soon as the news came out, Head Constable Yan Tao came to Chengshan Inn. In the past few days, Wu Yong had done a lot of things. With gold and silver and some connections with the Blackwater Gang, he had found many Lulin experts. The famous ones were Copper Whip Wang Gui, Silver Spear Song Gang, Swimming Dragon Hand, Li Zixing, and others. These people's martial arts were not low. They had stayed in the Black Well Street for a period of time because of a mishap and were taken care of by boss Hu Huaihai. It was because of this relationship that these people contacted Wu Yong in twos and threes under the promise of great benefits. Although the matter with the Black Water Gang had come to an end, Wu Yong still did not dare to move around in the capital during the day. When Yen Tao came to find him, he was lying on the bed to catch up on his sleep. However, when he heard the noise, he immediately stood up. When he got up, a short sword was already in his hand. "It's me, don't be so nervous. I came to tell you that he entered the city and is now at the entrance of the Ministry of Justice's prison. There are only a dozen guards around him." Yen Tao's voice came in an extremely low volume. Then the inn quickly became quiet again, giving people the feeling that this place had always been quiet. Wu Yong maintained the posture of holding the sword until there was no sound from the outside world. Then, as if he had woken up, his eyes flashed. Then he put on some makeup and quickly left Chengshan Inn. Although with his status, it would be more dangerous to go out during the day. Some opportunities were fleeting. If he did not seize them, he did not know when the next opportunity would come. As for Yen Tao, after leaving Chengshan Inn, he went to Yu Mansion again. This time, it was easy for him to walk in. The person who received him was the eldest grandson of Yu Mansion, Yu Yuanbi. He had also received the news and was waiting for his arrival. Then, a large net covered Yang Qindong's head. However, before everything happened, it was still very calm, like the darkness before dawn. There was no wind, no rain, and no sunlight. In front of the Ministry of Justice's prison, Li Qing was released. He did not show any fear on his face. Perhaps it was because the time he spent in prison was too short and his attention was focused on his illness. Fifth sister, Yang Qindong, also rushed over in the Li family's carriage. When she picked up her husband, the two of them expressed their gratitude to Yang Qindong. In this regard, the sixth young Master Yang casually waved his hand, as if he did not care. Since they were family, he wouldn't be stingy when it came to helping out. Not to mention, Li Qing was indeed a talent, a professional talent. If he could gain more experience, he had already begun to consider whether or not he should bring him to his side. Chapter 3:20. After settling the matter, Yang Qindong naturally would not stay in front of the prison of the Ministry of Justice any longer. The carriage turned around and headed straight for the south of the city. Everything that happened here today was just a small interlude in Yang Qindong's eyes. It was not something to be taken seriously, but he did not know that there was a murderous plot waiting for him on the way back. The Yongding Gate was one of the gates that Yang Qindong used to return to the Yang village. They had passed through this place countless times, and even the soldiers of the Five Cities Warden's office were extremely familiar with this place. When they saw that one of the most luxurious carriages in the capital, they bowed from a distance to express the respect they felt for it. Every time this happened, the curtain of the carriage would be opened, revealing Yang Qindong's young, handsome, and calm face. He nodded slightly, which could be considered as a greeting to the soldiers. Just this small action made countless soldiers extremely excited. Their eyes shone with excitement. Speaking of which, Yang Qindong still had some influence in the army, and it was not small before. Just like after defeating the Walla army, it was easy for him to infiltrate the army with his influence. But he did not do so. Originally, he walked the path of the elite. Although this way, the early development would be very slow, the advantage was that he had a solid foundation. Yang Qindong also believed that with the passage of time, there would be a day when this army would grow stronger. At that time, it would be the time for them to rise to the top of the world. The carriage left the Yongding Gate and headed for the Yang village 15 li away. In front of them, a group of 100 people was waiting in formation. They were lying on the side of the road, holding their breath and waiting for something. They were dressed in different clothes, and many of them were not familiar with each other. But this did not prevent them from gathering here because they had a common goal, and that was to kill the Duke of Loyalty of the great Ming dynasty. The people of the Lulin did not follow any rules. They might go berserk and kill people because of a sentence, but they might also fight because of a contemptuous look or fight over meaningless disputes. It was because of this that they were even more terrifying. And now, this group of terrifying people were gathered together. From this, it could be seen how powerful the person who attracted them was. That man was Wu Yong, the former second-in-command of the Blackwater Gang. He was lucky enough to survive. Back then, his mission was to ambush Yang Chendong halfway, but because he was detected too early, he failed in the end. This time, he took the same route as before, and even led these people to an ambush location not far from the previous ambush location. With this arrangement, he seemed to want to climb back up from where he fell. There were more than 100 heroes. All of them were Lulin people, and all of them had learned some martial arts. Among them, there were some who had made a name for themselves in Jianghu, such as Copper Whip Wang Gui, Silver Spear Song Gang, Roaming Dragon Hand Li Zixing, and so on. All of them had the ability to take on more than 10 people. If they were to encounter an ordinary man who relied on brute force, perhaps even 10 or 20 people would not be a match for them. Of course, Wu Yong was able to invite them because of the temptation of a large sum of money. Wu Yong said that after the matter was completed, the rewards would be very rich. However, at the same time, he also wanted to make a name for himself. In Jianghu, what mattered most was reputation and righteousness. The so-called reputation naturally referred to reputation and fame. Righteousness referred to the spirit of loyalty and righteousness that reached the clouds. Previously, during the bombardment of Blackwell Street, who knew how many Lulin people were killed? These people roamed Jianghu all year round, so it was impossible for them not to have 2 or 3 friends. For example, among these 100 people, there were some who came with the intention of avenging the death of their old friends. There were also some who came for fame. If they could kill the Duke of Loyalty and Courage of the great Ming dynasty, presumably it would be awe-inspiring. From then on, their reputation in Jianghu would be even more resounding, and it would be easier for them to do things. With all kinds of thoughts, more than 100 people hid in the dense forest beside the road. Since they were experts who had learned martial arts, they naturally had the ability to hide and adjust their breath, so that from a distance, it was impossible to see anything wrong with this place compared to other places. Under everyone's expectant eyes, a luxurious carriage appeared, and a small guard team of more than a dozen people also appeared in everyone's line of sight. At this moment, an austere atmosphere unknowingly filled this dense forest. Affected by it, one's breathing unconsciously became heavier. If one's hearing was good, one would already be able to faintly hear the sound of slightly heavy breathing. The carriage approached from afar, 300 feet, 200 feet, 100 feet, 800 feet, 500 feet, 300 feet, 10 feet, 8 feet, 5 feet. As it got closer and closer, the faces of the guards could already be seen through the dense forest. Suddenly, a loud shout rang out, and then a figure seemed to descend from the sky. A long bronze whip smashed directly at the moving carriage. The wind was swift, and the rain was like thunder. Under this blow, it had the power to wipe out 1,000 soldiers. Caught off guard, the roof of the luxurious carriage was hit heavily, and the whole body of the carriage seemed to be smashed a lot. However, because the body of the carriage was really sturdy, it was pierced with one blow. The person who made the move was Copper Whip Wang Gui. He first hid in a big tree, and when the carriage passed by, he suddenly attacked from above. He wanted to split the carriage to reveal the target of this trip, but because he underestimated the sturdiness of the carriage, his attack failed. When the attack began, a whip fell from the sky, and the horn of the attack was blown. Figures rushed out from the dense forest, either holding swords, sabers, or spears. The speed of these people was very fast. The distance of 100 feet was covered in only 2 to 3 breaths. Before the dozen or so guards could react, they rushed towards the unique and luxurious carriage that represented an extraordinary meaning. Boom! A long spear flashing, with silver light, directly pierced into the carriage. The one who made the move was Silver Spear Song Gang. After Copper Whip Wang Gui's attack failed, he used his own attack method. Clang! Just as the long spear was about to pierce into the carriage, a long saber came slashing over and struck the body of the silver spear, causing it to deviate slightly. The long spear that was supposed to enter through the curtain instead pierced the edge of the window, causing wood chips to fly into the air. Protect the young master. Beta Persei, who was holding the saber, had a very ugly expression on his face after the attack. Just from the exchange of blows just now, it seemed that he was not much better in terms of martial arts. There was no need for Beta Persei to shout anything else, as more than a dozen Lung Feng guards had already begun to draw their sabers to protect the carriage. They formed a group of 3, back to back, forming a circle. They stood on the side of the carriage, staring coldly at the people of the forest rushing in front of them. This was the 3-3 system taught by Yang Chendong. Once this strategy was used to fight the United States Army during the war to resist U.S. aggression and aid Korea. Now, it was used on the battlefield like an extension of one's arm. It was very useful and could be used to protect one's back and sides as much as possible in a chaotic battle. It allowed one to fight wholeheartedly without having to worry about other threats. As soon as the 3-3 system was used, although there were only more than a dozen Lung Feng guards, the 5 circles formed were very similar to one. This made the forest people, who were originally fighting separately, feel like they were impenetrable and impenetrable. Don't hold back. Finish off the target as soon as possible. Wu Yong also appeared in the crowd. His gaze only swept over the dozen Lung Feng guards before returning to the luxurious carriage. Intuition told him that these guards were very troublesome and difficult to deal with. Instead of fighting with them, it was better to directly kill Yang Chendong in the carriage. When the time came, things would naturally be much easier to deal with without a leader. With Wu Yong's appearance, the forest people who were originally fighting on their own became much more orderly. They began to approach the carriage step by step. At the same time, they also sent a portion of their men to surround the other 5 circles in other directions, using the tactic of holding back the guards. Quickly close in. Beta Persei saw that the opponents were closing in step by step and shouted with a thunderous voice. His voice was already very loud to begin with, so this shout was like a sudden clap of thunder, directly shaking the ears of swimming dragon hand Li Zixing, who had just rushed over to the point of buzzing. Li Zixing's footsteps were a little shaky because of this loud roar. Beta Persei, who used the roar similar to a lion's roar to disturb the enemy, immediately brandished his sword. He wanted to use this opportunity to cut down the people in front of him. The wind from the blade whistled and fell from the sky with a flash of light, drawing a beautiful arc. It was not until it was 20 centimeters away from Li Zixing's neck that it was forced to stop. It was a flashing silver spear, blocking the place where the blade fell. I'll help you. The one who made the move was Silver Spear Song Gang, just like how Beta Persei blocked his spear from entering the carriage. This time, he also blocked Beta Persei's killing move against Li Zixing. The blade was blocked, and there was a very crisp sound of weapons clashing. This also let Li Zixing know what had happened. After a loud shout, he pushed out his palms and slammed them in front of Beta Persei. Even though Beta Persei was tall and strong, he did not dare to underestimate the two of them. He stepped back to ensure his own safety. Beta Persei was forced to retreat to the side. The situation did not seem good. Even the other 15 members of the Cold Front were beginning to be separated. They were in a team of 3, and they were facing a team of more than 10 people. Under the advantage of several times the manpower, they were like small boats sailing in the sea, with the possibility of capsizing at any time. In a situation where a crisis could occur at any time, they really did not have the opportunity to take out their guns and fire. The Cold Front were separated, and Beta Persei was forced to retreat to the side, leaving the front door of the carriage wide open. Only a hanging curtain was left hanging there, indicating that he was still very mysterious. "Go, open the curtain." Wu Yong came to the carriage with more than 10 of the forest's experts. When he thought of Yang Qindong's title as the war god, he did not know why, but at this moment there was a trace of fear in his heart. Chapter 3:21. The forest man pointed out by Wu Yong did not have so many taboos. Sometimes ignorance was blameless. He did not know how powerful Yang Qindong was, and was even a little excited that he could lift the curtain. Taking large strides forward, he placed the saber in his left hand and reached out his hand towards the area where the palanquin curtain was. Bang! The sound of a gunshot rang out, and the blade fell to the ground. A bloody hole appeared on the forehead of the Greenwood man, and blood was flowing out of it. His eyes were wide open, showing the confusion and fear he had in the moment before he died. The man fell to the ground, and a strong smell of blood naturally came out and drilled into the nostrils of Wu Yong and the others. Hiss! Seeing the scene in front of him, Wu Yong could not help but suck in a breath of cold air, and at the same time, he naturally took a step back. He knew that the loyal Duke was not easy to kill, and now it seemed that it was indeed so. "Let's go together." But the hesitation only lasted for a moment, and Wu Yong made up his mind again. As the second brother of the Blackwater gang, he had naturally come into contact with the firearms of the great Ming dynasty before. He knew that although this thing was powerful, it had more problems. For example, it was only effective at close range, and it could only fire one shot at a time. But out of his cautious nature, he did not send people to try, but decided to swarm in. When the time came, how would the loyal Duke, who only had one firearm, deal with it? Initially, the gunshot had indeed frightened everyone. They were still thinking about what to do next, but Wu Yong's voice had already sounded. When he heard that everyone was going to attack together, he suddenly became spirited again. Perhaps this was human nature. When one person was afraid to do something because of fear, the fear seemed to disappear when everyone was together. Under Wu Yong's encouragement, more than a dozen people were divided into 2 groups. They formed a semicircle and closed in on the luxurious carriage. All kinds of weapons flashed coldly, and they were ready to kill at any time. The scene in front of the carriage made Beta Persei and the 15 Lung Feng brothers anxious. They tried to get closer, but they were all blocked by the forest people who had the advantage in numbers. Among them, Beta Persei had rushed too fiercely and did not take care of his own defense. His shoulder was hit by Li Zixing's swimming dragon hand, and his entire left arm felt numb. This was because he had been training for many years. If it was an ordinary person, they would not be able to fight back after being hit by this palm. No one could come to help. Yang Qindong, who was in the carriage, seemed to have fallen into a desperate situation. At least, that was what Wu Yong thought. In his opinion, Yang Qindong was only in his early 20s. Even some of the martial arts grandmasters and famous big shots would find it very difficult to rush out when facing a dozen or more opponents. Big brother, third brother, this brother is going to avenge you. Wu Yong muttered in his heart. His eyes were filled with murderous intent. At this moment, it was as if he wanted to chop off Yang Chendong's head as a sacrifice for his brothers. The forest people approached step by step. The nearest person was already within arm's reach of the carriage's curtain. That person held the long sword in his hand and swung it forward. He wanted to cut off the curtain to provide enough support for his and his brother's vision. For a moment, everyone's eyes were focused on the long sword, as if they wanted to see what kind of vision the sword would bring when it was swung down. They also wanted to see if the young loyal duke of the great Ming dynasty, whom they had identified as their target, was really that powerful. Did he really have 3 heads and 6 arms? Bang! Another gunshot rang out, accompanied by the scene of the forest man holding the sword falling to the ground. This gunshot also caused the other forest men to involuntarily take a step back. Obviously, they were very wary of this flintlock. Don't be afraid. He only has 1 flintlock. If we attack together, he won't be able to do anything. Wu Yong saw that the morale of his men was shaken, so he immediately shouted loudly. As he looked around, he saw Copper Whip Wang Gui and the others besieging a 3-man cold vanguard squad. Under the wave of the Copper Whip, the 3-man squad was indeed in a very difficult situation. There were even different wounds on the 3 men's bodies. However, the formation was really special. At the very least, it was useful for defense. It actually caused the forest men, who outnumbered them by several times, to be unable to find a suitable opportunity to attack in a short period of time. Since it didn't work immediately, Wu Yong shouted loudly, "Brother Wang, please come help." "Oh, how is it? Why hasn't the carriage been opened yet?" Wang Gui, who was attracted by the shout, stood beside Wu Yong. His voice seemed to be concerned, but in reality, it was filled with a sense of superiority. He was thinking about the uselessness of these people. With so many people, they couldn't even deal with a stopped carriage. It was really difficult to look up to them. "Yes, it hasn't been opened yet. It seems that we still need Brother Wang's copper whip." Wu Yong was very good at manipulating people. Naturally, he could see Wang Gui's arrogance. However, it didn't matter. He would just satisfy the other party. At most, he would say a few nice words. It wasn't like he would lose anything. Sure enough, after hearing Wu Yong's flattering words, Wang Gui laughed heartily. "Fine, since Brother Wu has said so, then I have no choice but to make a move. Come, all of you, get out of the way. Watch me directly shatter that curtain." Wang Gui, who was laughing, placed the 7-section copper whip on the ground. The other forest men also tactfully retreated to the side. The power of the 2 spears was truly frightening. They couldn't figure out what was inside the carriage, and they didn't even know when to dodge at the crucial moment. It was better to let Wang Gui use his copper whip to lift the curtain. The forest men obeyed and retreated to the side. However, from the way they stood, they still faintly surrounded the carriage. It seemed that they were only waiting for their field of vision to widen so that they could charge forward and finish off their target. Under everyone's gaze, Wang Gui raised his right arm. The veins on his arm were already bulging at this moment. The 7-section copper whip followed a loud whistling sound as it smashed towards the huge curtain of the luxurious carriage. As expected of the copper whip, this time, Wang Gui's attack was very accurate. With just 1 strike, it hit the horse curtain. With a twist and a pull, the originally heavy curtain flew up along with the copper whip. At this moment, the figure of the person in the luxurious carriage was clearly imprinted in everyone's line of sight. A green robe with a calm face. There wasn't the slightest hint of nervousness or urgency from being surrounded. This was the first impression that Yang Qindong gave everyone. As expected of the Duke of loyal and courageous, Wu Yong had once been fortunate enough to see Yang Qindong on the street. Although it was still far away, he could still recognize him. At this moment, when he saw that the person in the carriage was the target that he wanted to take his life, he couldn't help but excitedly shout out. Just as Wu Yong's shout fell, Yang Qindong in the carriage sighed. "That's right. I am the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. However, I don't know what enmity I have with you. Why must you take my life? You've killed countless people. Do I need a reason to kill you?" At this moment, Wu Yong really wanted to tell Yang Qindong how his big brother and third brother were killed. However, considering that a long delay might lead to trouble, he decisively chose to give up. Instead, he held a ghost knife in his hand and pointed at Yang Qindong. "Kill him. Whoever kills him will be rewarded with 1,000 taels of silver." 1,000 taels of silver was enough for an ordinary family of 3 to live for the rest of their lives. Even for the forest people who spent money extravagantly, it was a huge sum of money. As the saying goes, people die for wealth. As the shout fell, 4 or 5 figures had already rushed out. Their target was Yang Qindong, who was sitting in the carriage. They could already see clearly. "Kill!" The 5 figures shouted in unison. It seemed like they were cheering for themselves, but also seemed like they were raising their voices. "Sai, you're forcing me to kill." In the carriage, Yang Qindong sighed softly. Then he took out his hands that were hidden under his green robe. At the same time, he also took out a machine gun used by the 9th Squad. With the great warehouse in hand, the world is mine. How could Yang Qindong, who could enter the great warehouse at any time and take out all kinds of new weapons, be afraid of these unorganized, so-called heroes of the forest in front of him? These people had no discipline. When there were benefits, they would often rush up like a swarm of bees. When there was danger, they would often run away without a trace. Against such opponents, as long as he could suppress their morale, it would be much easier to deal with what came next. In Yang Qindong's eyes, these people were not even as good as a well-trained army. At least, when the general gave the order, these soldiers would charge even if they knew that they would die. That might be a headache for him, but these forest people in front of him, this motley crew, really did not mean anything in his eyes. With a look of contempt in his eyes, he pulled the trigger with his right index finger, and the sound of firecrackers rang out. Bang, bang, bang. Bang, bang, bang. It was as if someone was welcoming a bride, and the sound of firecrackers rang out nonstop, following the sound of gunfire. In reality, the first 5 Greenwood warriors who rushed over had blood-red flowers appear on their bodies. Then, like dominoes, they fell to the ground one by one. What is this? Wu Yong and the others, who did not understand the details and did not even know what an advanced igniter was, were dumbfounded. Previously, Wu Yong thought that since Yang Qindong could lead the army to repel Walla's attack, he must be someone with some ability. However, his ability should be mainly reflected in his intelligence, just like his position in the Blackwater Gang, where he was a strategist and played the game of strategizing. However, in terms of skills, perhaps this young loyal duke had also learned martial arts, but after all, he was too young and should not have any deeper attainments. This was also because Wu Yong overestimated Yang Qindong enough, which was why he brought more than 100 people to besiege him. With nearly 10 times the number advantage and a sudden attack, no matter how one looked at it, they would not fail. But now, when the gunshots rang out continuously, seeing his brothers fall to the ground one by one, he finally realized that he had underestimated this loyal duke of the great Ming dynasty. You're tuning into the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.